All right.
Hello
Well,
again.
yay, you're back. I'm so excited and happy. So yeah, you and I have stayed in touch, and I clearly, we're on social media together, and I've been watching all of your other programs that other people have been hosting you. You did something this weekend. I watched that while I was watching the treadmill, and I subscribed to your YouTube channel, and you posted several videos this weekend, and I listened to those as well. I have just been absorbing. It's a lot of information, but I've just been soaking it up. The other problem is that I'm always like bothering you now because I view the world differently.
Once you
And
get the set of glasses, yeah.
yeah, it's like once I hear something about interoperability, Internet of Things, I'm like, oh my God, here's a video. I sent you something last night on YouTube, and you were like, oh
I know that was all the bad stuff, right?
my God,
Oh,
no. But it goes to show like what you're saying is not crazy. These people are, that's why I've been telling my friends, I was like, I know this sounds crazy to you because like most regular people don't just sit up and watch CNBC all day. They don't follow
right.
investors and people who do all this stuff like that. At least people in my circle, I'll
Right.
say that. Like I'm not in a circle where people are always talking about investments, what the next cool thing is, and all of that. But what interested me recently, and you've like just like my page has just become a fan of you now, but you have researched the new Secretary of Education, which we will be talking about tonight because I think it's going to blow people's mind. It blew mine, like just looking at the slides that you're going to share tonight. You know,
Well, I mean, and we've been talking about it too, that this program that's advancing is being advanced from a progressive point of view, which is different than the last administration, right? It's like, we'd like to take care of you. And so they need a certain type of person to carry that message, right?
yeah.
And then who I sort of feel like maybe we could stage an intervention,
Well, I'll be honest with you. Like, nobody in my circle, like their eyebrows weren't raised. Like the weekend before the inauguration, Biden elevated this geneticist to a cabinet level position. And like you've been talking about this. And so like the little ring went off in my head. I was like, oh my God, she's right. Look at this shit.
The
And like
eugenics.
nobody else is batting an eye because they're like, oh yeah, we want to believe the science. Yeah, scientist is there. But like this guy is not just a scientist.
They're
He's
an
a
engineer. They're
yeah,
engineers. Yeah.
he's a geneticist, which is right. So that's for people who are listening, right? Like to me, I see that as an evolved kind of form of eugenics.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm
Well,
saying?
and the talk I did over the weekend, I was looking at bees, which might seem irrelevant, but someone had shared with me GMO bees, genetic therapy for bees, and they said, it's so terrible that we have such a toxic environment. Why don't we genetically engineer the bees to live in the toxic environment? Wouldn't that be great?
Wow.
And then I
Wow.
thought, everything they're doing to bees, like we're a couple phases down the road, but like it'll be us, right? Like why clean up the environment when you can just genetically engineer people to live in it, right? Or
Wow.
try to live in it? And I feel like that's, who gets to decide what the world's going to be.
Yeah. Well, for people who are listening, this is going to be a good conversation. We are about to walk through some well researched documentation here. And so I want to encourage everybody right now to like and share the video. Share this video with people that you love, with people that you care about. That's what I've been doing. I've been like tagging people that I know who are in the social justice movement with me, people who have a certain kind of like social justice lens,
Right.
because it's all of this stuff is like really connected in some very, very strange ways. So I want to hand it off to you, Allison. Thank you so much.
Well, so I want to just frame this out. This is really the backdrop to Mr. Cardona. Miguel Cardona, what is Biden chose him to be the Secretary of Education, and is very much sort of an opposite of DeVos. And I feel like knowing what was coming with transforming the education system into an impact opportunity, right? A way of turning children and the trauma and the problems that children and their families have to navigate in sort of this increasingly brutal economic situation, even worse with the lockdowns, that this was going to be a business enterprise, but it's all framed as caring, right? And increasingly schools were going to be medicalized. And I have a friend, Lynn Taylor in North Carolina, who blogs at Common Core Diva, and she's very, very good. She comes from more of a conservative angle, but very, very good on the legislation and understanding the ways in which, like, Medicaid was going to be sort of baked into the school systems. And so I think increasingly, knowing that we're operating in a biosecurity state now under the pandemic, that's part of it. So the presentation that I have tonight is not so much about Mr. Cardona per se, but it is about the landscape in which he came out of, right? And so I sort of feel like, I've read some things that indicate that, he's a caring human being, that his heart is in the right place, but he has to navigate some really challenging waters. And probably, I consider this maybe an opportunity to give a bit of a moral compass and to show people, in showing them the landscape, they too may be able to have a more critical lens about what's coming. So anyway, so with that, let me see. Okay, so I think I'll have to do it from here. Okay, so this is him in the virtual reality headset. And I think this is a very compelling image. And I'm working with some folks locally who are helping sort of refine this messaging, I think, in a more accessible way and give people like a more useful framework and language to talk about this. And their names are Ulysses Slaughter and Brother Shamari. And so we had been talking about laying out a framework. And so what they're talking about now is something called CITE, but it's CITE. And it's capture, inject, trace, and erase. So CITE with the C, capture, inject, trace, and erase. And we talked about the nature of capture. And this is within the context of the commodification of the Black body, particularly in the capitalist system. And that this capture happens not only from a physical standpoint, but from a mental and a spiritual standpoint. So like on each of these levels of the capture, the injection, the tracing, which is sort of the digital twinning, and then the erasure, both from like a cultural erasure standpoint and a genocidal standpoint, that's happening at both levels. And I feel like that this was a really compelling image for me to start with, because to me, it's sort of like he's been captured by that virtual reality headset. And that this is manifesting a future of education that aims to capture the children to essentially become servants of robots, essentially in this new economic paradigm, globalization paradigm that is coming out of Davos.
So to clear up the new, because I've been talking about this lately, and so the new economic paradigm is specifically known also as the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, and also the Great Reset.
Yes. And Davos has had like a number, every year they have like a theme. So the World Economic Forum members gather in Davos in January. So this is going on actually right now. And every year has a theme. And so this year's theme, I believe, is the Great Reset. Last year's theme was about stakeholder capitalism. And I believe the year before was actually Globalization 4.0. So, we were already in a global economic system where we were we offshore jobs, but then increasingly jobs became put on digital platforms, right? And this is pre-COVID. So teaching jobs, coding jobs, a lot of technical jobs were happening digitally. And so this next phase that they're going into, that they aim to go into, of Globalization 4.0, is actually one in which you're not only doing labor through screens and in so competing with people around the world for bottom of the barrel wages to do this work, gig work, often unstable work, but that increasingly over the next decade, the plan is to refine robotic technologies that people could operate them remotely. So through augmented reality or virtual reality settings and the use of haptic controllers, like the hand controllers you see with the games, that people would literally compete to do all sorts of work against everyone else on the planet based on having some sort of complement of skills, stackable credentials both in terms of your knowledge, your abilities, and your mindset. And we'll get into that later, but the idea of the blockchain identity will be the trusted source for that, of these stackable credentials. And when they talk about trust, blockchain is framed as trust so that AI can decide who can do the small task for the lowest price with the highest reputation. It's all about sorting. So it's a little intense, but I think it's important that people understand that education is meant to feed children into a future, the needs of industry. I mean, that's compulsory education has always been that. And increasingly, education needs to hold the minds of these children so that they imagine that this is the only option. And so what I would say, to individuals like Mr. Cardona and people in his administration at the federal level is to really do some soul searching about, is this moral? Is this a moral choice to harness the children into a future that essentially they will be subservient to technologies and robotics and dehumanized? And so that's
really scary for parents who have kids in schools. I mean, because
it's going to be lifelong. Like, we're all going to be, if we don't oppose this, we will be reskilled into this new model.
Yeah, that is really scary. It makes me think about, I lost my train of thought. I mean, because I can't imagine myself being reskilled to do any of this shit. Right. Like, because I'm like, but
our scores will be very low, Zakia. We will not be getting the work.
So what happens to the people who won't be able to get work in this shit? I imagine that
we might
there's not gonna be a whole lot of work, right? Like, that's why that's why I'm gonna be honest with you, Allison. Like, I was really skeptical several years ago when billionaires, particularly tech billionaires, I think Jack Dorsey at Twitter, I think the Facebook people, like when the Silicon Valley tech billionaires started talking about universal basic income, a red flag rose, but I didn't know why. Like, I was just like, this doesn't feel right. But it feels like it's kind of like connected to this. Like, they know like what's coming. Like, there's only going to be so many jobs for people to do robots from home. And so what the hell is everybody else going to be doing?
I mean, but a lot of they're going to be building the global prison. That's well,
and then I think what the hell is the global prison?
Well, when you put everybody out of work, these people are not going to build enough jails to hold everybody. The last round of globalization, you had the drug wars, you had
it was just Black people that were the target, right, and poor people.
Right. So that was the excess labor force. Those people were remade as commodities in the carceral state. Right. And
private prisons,
that became profit centers, both in terms of prison labor and also servicing those and extracting more money out of families. Loved ones.
Don't you think it's interesting that now Biden's administration is like outlawing a small portion of he's not really outlawing, he's going to like not renew the contracts for the private prisons. But there were leaders like years ago when this was happening, like you are doing now, who were trying to raise the red alarm flag. And some of those leaders were considered fringe groups. And I remember, because Michelle Alexander actually wrote about it in her book, The New Jim Crow. She said she was a lawyer at the ACLU of Northern California, and it was people from the Nation of Islam, which people think, is a fringe group, like, that were protesting, protesting the Biden 94 crime bill. And now we have Biden for this new initiative. This is strange.
It's layers, right? So, but it's not, they can create through the use of 5G technology and 6G and track and trace and pushing people onto digital benefits that they can withhold if you step out of line. they can turn the world into a new form of a carceral state. And it's just incarceration, but even much more broadly and much more cost effective for them to, and then turn people into these social impact commodities, which is what we're talking about. But like, I'm hoping that we could stage a bit of an intervention with Dr. Cardona and get him out of that headset, because like I actually, when I was doing this research, I was looking through a lot of the different articles about him, and there was like a very wonderful image of him in high school. He went to a technical high school and he was scaling a mural. Like he was taking I don't know if it was a drawing or a photo, and scaling it up as this artistic piece. So somewhere in there is someone with a very deep appreciation for art and culture and direct connections. I do believe that. Like, and I feel like I want to write a letter to him about this, because I think he is being put in a very, very difficult situation. And that is happening because on the surface, he suits the role that they need him to play.
Right. He's a person of color. He came from poverty, all of that. They're weaponizing identity.
Yeah.
I know you don't want to say that, but I'll say it.
I mean, yeah, but he's a person, and he seems very caring. So this is just a map that talks a little bit about, I know we can't zoom in on this map, but.
Oh, I can make it a little bit bigger. Just a minute.
Okay. I'll share the slide link, and if people want to go, they can click through the link and look at it more closely. This is essentially sort of a layout. I mean, this is a person who, he grew up in public housing. His grandparents came from Puerto Rico, and his family came up. He earned graduate degrees, an EDD at the University of Connecticut. He was always in education. He went back in his hometown and taught in school, and then became an administrator, and then became an assistant superintendent of instruction. So, this is someone who stayed very close to home, to his community, and is active in things like the United Way and Boys and Girls Club. So, things that many civic participants do and might not necessarily think of the larger agenda. And then recently in 2019 was appointed as a commissioner to the State Department of Education, which is interesting because they actually had planned on selecting another gentleman who was an older Black educator who at the last minute was pulled, and then he was slid in to be that commissioner. So he was a commissioner for about a year. But the district that he's in, and again, he's not even the superintendent, he's the assistant superintendent, was involved in data dashboards. And Mr. Cardona was connected with sort of early learning at the state level, and also the achievement gap. And for folks who
sorry, I always hate to cut you off. I'm sorry, Alison. I just wanted you to unpack data dashboards really quickly. Can you unpack that for people?
Yeah, so the data dashboards are in this new financial game that we are entering. The idea is to redefine success as moving data in a preferred direction. I mean, mostly in coming through this, it was test scores, right? That you would move test scores in a certain direction. Although eventually it's going to be also, social welfare outcomes or, other things like that will be, but it has to be represented in a quantifiable way on a dashboard. So it's numerical, it's data driven. And the interests that are behind this, in addition to the hedge funds who are looking to invest in human capital, also include the companies that are doing the data dashboards, which include Microsoft and Salesforce, and these major technology companies. So I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the key hedge fund operators in Connecticut was imposing these dashboard systems in schools that were shown to need improvement, whatever that is deemed to mean. And, what my experience as a parent in a low income, underfunded public school, urban public school system was that the schools that where the kids most needed things like art and music and sports and human contact and reduced class size, when they got put under control of outside systems, they did not get those things. They got more programs to manage them as data. They got more time on software. They didn't actually get things that would help them become better adjusted and more fulfilled human beings, children, right? Like they were given just more technology.
Wow.
So does that?
Yes, thank you. No, that you broke it all the way down. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Keep going.
So so Rise Networks was part of that. Imagine Learning was part of that. And I'm going to have a chance to go out to Salt Lake City in a couple weeks. But it's interesting that the primary funder of Imagine Learning is Sorensen Capital. And Jim Sorensen is a biotech technology media communications guy who's a primary impact investor in Utah, and his son runs Sorensen Capital, which is the investor in Imagine Learning, which was one of the technology systems that's used in the Meriden School District, where he was an administrator. So this is essentially an image just to sort of show where he is, his overall trajectory. But again, someone who has a deep connection to his culture. He's involved in the Meriden Hispanic Foundation and the Puerto Rican Festival Committee. So someone who's very much interested in advancing cultural praxis and making that available in the schools in a meaningful way, which I'm assuming is not in a virtual reality headset. So that's all good, but he's within the context of this larger, a small state with some very outsized players in the financial realm, including Ray Dalio, who is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. So
I love this research. Thank you.
Well, this is Yale Acres. So this is where he grew up. I think it's being renovated now. And I do want to sort of speak to the fact that, he has these very strong cultural ties. And, I consider that, that image that's still stuck in my head of the, that virtual reality headset as an imperial apparatus, like a capturing apparatus. And that, if we understand, the indigenous people of Puerto Rico and the empire and the extractivism, right?
Yes.
The resources that now it's data and they're being captured by these technologies. And in many respects, the public health system was used and weaponized against them by this individual, Cornelius Rhodes, which I've mentioned in other talks, but he was working for Rockefeller University on anemia. He was a very prestigious Massachusetts doctor, but he said he hated the people of Puerto Rico and he was injecting his patients with cancer and trying to kill them, and wrote it in a letter that really catalyzed the Puerto Rican nationalist movement, rightfully so. So when we're sort of grappling in this moment with the overreach of the Rockefeller legacy in our school systems, in our health systems, I think it's very significant and compelling that he has this family history and the ties. And I would suspect, it's not too much of a stretch to understand the role of empire and, sort of asymmetrical warfare and the difference between a European mindset and an indigenous mindset going forward, because I think these are all really critical things to consider.
Thank you. And I just have to say, for me as a Black woman, the historical perspective that you bring to your research, I thank you for that, because many times we talk about these things in a vacuum, not like they're on a continuum. This is really a continuum of the legacy of enslavement of my people, descendants of enslaved Africans in this country, and of course, indigenous people of this land and Puerto Rico as well. This is really a continuum of the same kind of thing that we have been dealing with hundreds of years. So I just had to appreciate you bringing in the historical lens.
And I'm really late to this game. And I think that sort of maybe speaks to the education system, right? I always did really well in school and I never learned any of these things in school. And I didn't. And I
didn't either. A lot. The curriculum is violent. We don't learn about ourselves. I didn't learn about African history even before the Ma'afa, or the enslavement of African people here. I didn't learn about the history, the glory, the beautiful history of Africa before they met the European colonialists and imperialists. It wasn't until I got to community college that I was introduced to Cheikh Anta Diop and Chancellor Williams and all of these African and Black scholars who went back and actually corrected a lot of the European history that had us like documented as savages.
And that's why I really truly feel that as we're grappling with this really existential threat of, bio nanotechnology and things that are coming out of this Western scientism framework, that's what I'm hoping to lean on, and not that it's mine to appropriate, but like that history and that strength of resistance, I think is really central. And that's why I'm really grateful to be able to have a chance to speak with, your audience and other audiences, because I can only do some part of this, right? Like I can provide a good intelligence briefing, but I don't know the way out really. And I'm hoping that we'll get to the point that enough of us understand the nature of the situation that I can be somewhat in support, if desired, in finding this, what we do next, because I think it is grounded in the history, and that there is a need for, as I was talking with Ulysses and Brother Shamari, like a reckoning. There's a reckoning that's coming, but there are opportunities for redemption, I think. But we have to be able to actually be really, really honest about it, because if we just do half measures and we brush to the side what this is about, we're not going to actually ever deal with a problem.
Exactly.
So I'm just getting back to nuts and bolts again, like the human capital finance is what I do. Back when the Every Student Succeeds Act passed, there was a section in it called Pay for Success. Okay. And at that point, very few people knew anything about social impact bonds or social impact finance. And it seemed like a relatively small thing, even though some people were already looking at it critically back in 2015. And so that was an area of concern for me. So you haven't heard a whole lot about Pay for Success under Trump, because for the most part, the idea was to not have the federal government super involved in what was going on in schools. So it's a mix. I'm not saying it's great, but like we're about to see this pendulum swing back. So what Obama, put in place with getting the ESSA set up for human capital finance, I really think that is very likely to roll out in a big way under the Biden administration. And Kamala Harris was executing a lot of social impact finance in California as well. So
Yep.
she's very familiar with this. And so this is
Listen,
what
you
is walking into, right? Is like this trap has been sprung of Pay for Success finance and education. And then like, here he's coming. So this is a map that I did that, again, it's a screenshot. So we'll go into, people can click through later, but Connecticut is actually a center for a number of pilots in impact investing. And I mentioned it in some of my other talks that really for the past 5 to 10 years, the financial and technology interests have been refining pilot programs. There's been seed money, both from the federal government, through the Social Innovation Fund, which is part of the Corporation for National and Community Service, and that's AmeriCorps is part of that too. And then smaller bits of money through foundations and through social finance and third sector capital to try and figure out how to scale these projects. Because, as I mentioned before, the money is not going to be in the deals themselves, which are essentially outcomes-based government contracts for social services. They're going to negotiate a rate of return if they get their success metrics, and it's not going to be a whole lot of money. And so most people scratch their heads and say, why would anyone bother with this? There's just not a lot of money in privatizing welfare. Well, the money is going to be in the fact that these folks plan to securitize the debt and have the hedge funds trade it. And so that's where the money is going to be. And so these pilots in Connecticut, there's a gentleman, his name is David Wilkinson, and he's like sort of in the upper left corner. And he was the head of Obama's Office of Social Innovation. He did a lot for setting up Pay for Success. And then he went to Connecticut. He has a law degree from Yale, and he went to work with the early childhood services there in Connecticut. So he's like a bit of a puppet master in this. They are trying to develop what they called outcomes rate cards, because they need, for these hedge funds to work, if you imagine that this debt is going to be bundled like mortgages, they need a bazillion of them, right? They essentially need to put out of work every, grandmotherly home-based daycare on the block and put them into corporate franchises with surveillance play tables and get the data, because they want to scale these, and it has to come in a very big way. They haven't done it yet, but that's what's coming. They're going to, and this is what's so sad is that, I know in the Black community, like childcare provider, that's a big small business for a lot of communities.
That's a big small business specifically for Black women, poor working class Black women who may not have an opportunity to work outside of the home. One thing, let me to give you a personal, right, really quickly. I wasn't able to afford childcare when I had my son and when my daughter was born. So it was a Black woman who was a friend of the family who kept my babies that I paid under the table, and she didn't charge me. So these are the people that they're gonna push out.
They're going to be coding photographs for the autonomous vehicles for the AI. I mean, that's what they imagine. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, do we want corporate franchise daycare with standardized data metrics, tracking your kids on a surveillance play table, knowing that the software systems that were set up in California for the pre-K programs, the guy who set them up his former career was setting up FBI caseloads work. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about here, right? Oh, here, click in with your biometric thumbprint so you can pick up your kid. And that's how we're because
it's Black Mirror coming to life.
It is. It is. I mean, but again, I'm not totally giving up hope, because I think if people understood, imagine if all of these home-based daycares got together and refused to and the parents to give up their kids to the system, right? That we found some other way to do it. So they're working in the pre-K space, and that's something that Cardona is interested in. He's talking about universal pre-K. And again, it's very difficult because people need affordable childcare, right? Like that is we live in a world where there's an expectation that you've got 2+ incomes in the household, right? Like even if you're one person, you've got 2 incomes. Like you're cobbling things together. Childcare is a huge piece. And so when people come in and say, well, good, we're going to give you subsidized or free daycare, people are going to jump at that because they're not going to realize what is behind it, like that this is about betting on the lives of the children. There's another social impact pilot that was in Connecticut called the Family Stability Act. And this, I think, is really important to understand. These were women who were flagged for substance use and child protective services, which, many things can flag you for that, right?
That would have been my mom in the 80s.
Yeah. So these women were then tracked with a program that was developed out of Yale, and to get this data, come and pee in a cup 3 times a week and do a, online program or something like that. Now the most of these women in this program made $10,000 a year or less in Connecticut, right? So, I mean, and at the end of the game, their material condition of their living conditions were not any better. But their data might have gotten better, so the impact investors would make some money. And among the investors in these programs were BNP Paribas, which is a French bank, and QBE Insurance, which is Australian insurance company. So this Family Stability Act was essentially packaging these women and children, their trauma, them navigating a very difficult situation into a global marketable commodity. And again, it's stamped with the Yale, School of Approval, right? The Yale Child Study Center did and there were folks connected to Philadelphia in on that deal too. So that's another one that they're looking to scale. And I want to emphasize, within the historic continuum, they want to control the population because they know that with what they have planning, that there's likely to be civil unrest, right? Once people really wake up. And so how do you control families?
They know as soon as everybody wake up, it's a wrap.
They're going to want their kids, right? You control the adults by controlling their kids or threatening to take their kids away. And so many of these economic social impact opportunities are framed as the 2-generation solution, the 2 generations. So they're doing verticals. They're making impact money on the parent. They're making impact money on the kid. But there is an implicit threat in that if you don't go with the program, they're going to take your kids away, and goodness knows what happens to them then. And that's something that goes back to slavery, right? I mean, that's why it was very hard for enslaved women to get away, because how do you take all your kids? You know, and that's what we're looking at right now. So this is this landscape that Cardona is coming out of. It's innovative finance. It's a number of these pilots. There's a couple of key hedge funds that are based in Connecticut, Ray Dalio with Bridgewater, and then also Paul Tudor Jones, who's with Tudor Investments. His former fund manager, his name is Robert Duger, and Robert Duger worked with Jim Heckman, who is doing the childhood equation at University of Chicago, and Paul Tudor Jones, who I'll show later, but he helped fund this Invest in Kids working group that was about 10 years ago when they were setting up the equation. So he definitely understands what's going on with child capital. I want to mention, like someone in one of the articles, they said that Mr. Cardona was an advocate of technology. In 2014, Obama pushed a whole lot of STEM and ed tech systems from the federal end. This is a document from 2014 that was talking about high impact pull mechanisms for high impact learning technologies. So high impact means it's data driven and it's moving a lot of data. And that's for these dashboards. So in 2014, they're already saying, you know, lay it out. What do you got in terms of high impact technology? And this is Amplify. So that's Rupert Murdoch's, company. And in 2014, they're saying that they want to fund these technologies with social impact bonds. Okay, so that's educational technology is very closely linked to social impact finance in the school settings. I will say from a more recent history context, it's important not to forget the history. In 2010, Lower Merion School District, which is a very affluent school district right outside of Philadelphia, they were one of the first districts to get one-to-one laptops. And they got fancy laptops, not just crummy Chromebooks and iPads, but they got these nice laptops, and the school district was caught spying on the children with the webcams. And it was a really big deal, and it should have been a really big deal. And ultimately, the FBI let them off the hook, but the families won in civil court. Okay, so this was in 2010. So in 2010, we were using the powers that be were using technologies to spy on some of the richest, most privileged kids in the country. Fast forward a decade. Now, almost every poor family has a Chromebook, a crummy Chromebook that's loaded up with GoGuardian on there.
Talk about it. Talk about it.
You've got the eye of the state in your home, assuming you have a home and you're not living in a shelter or out of your car. And Amplify, this is the top line there. It says, this is their program that they were going to use, and they were talking about what impact metrics they could use for social impact bonds. And they have lots of metrics about student engagement. When did they log on? How often did they type? There's a lot of behavioral biometrics in how the students use the platform. But they were also looking at how the parents could be roped in, and that they would have metrics about the parents logging in and clicking through the emails and being monitored that way. The parent participation. Again, that's making the parent part of this larger surveillance control system that is now in your home. And we're all supposed to celebrate that everybody's home with these Chromebooks. And, we should just be really grateful for having everybody spy on you in your house.
Not only do we want to celebrate that, we have people who refuse to come up with an alternative solution, whether in school or out of school. And we have, people who are like demanding to stay virtual. And I'm like, people are not thinking about the big picture. Yeah.
Well, and I will say, it's difficult because I was engaged on Twitter with a woman who was, doing advocacy work, a Black elder woman in Harlem or the Bronx, and was very insistent about this and talking about when I looked at her Twitter feed, her profile photo was like a high school kid with a Hewlett Packard box. and she had Malcolm X was the banner picture, but then she had Hewlett Packard. And I'm like, Hewlett Packard is running the biometric border control in Gaza, right? And they're also involved in a lot of other things. So while we're loading all of this stuff into our living rooms or, our kitchen tables, we need to understand this bigger view that it isn't a gift. They're not giving us a gift. This is infrastructure for a mining project, a human capital mining project. And they're not just mining the kids, they're going to mine the parents too. And that's part of the social impact bond program, right? Like they want to know that you're a compliant parent, that the parent is complying with the program.
And to be clear, the social impact bond is what's going to be traded, and people are in these hedge funds are going to make money off of it.
Yeah. I mean, and this is tied to educational technology and the pay for success systems. Again, they have not yet scaled. I know in Texas, they have a lot. I think it's going to be around math curriculum. There's in Texas, a social impact bond coordinator for math education, because again, they want kids who can do mathematics and code the digital prison, especially if they're girls, and they can add extra layers of, tranches of investment on that, because girls are another special market to for STEM.
Again, like we said earlier, weaponizing identity.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, it's biocapitalism, really. So that's that. And this speaks to, it's a lot of text here, but this is essentially talking about the first pay for success projects that were launched under ESSA. And so this was back in 2016, but it was for pre-K, it was for special education, it was for language acquisition, and it was for sort of career, like technical job training. And I would say, like for Mr. Cardona, those are all things that he has expressed an interest in, right? He's working in early childhood space. He has a very strong interest in English language learners because of his family history, and also the achievement gap, much of which is tied to college and career readiness. So all of these things that are his interests were set up as of 2016 for pay for success finance in the ESSA, in the federal realm that he is now entering. And so I would say the question here, this is yet analytics. This is an image of like all those little dots are people, and this is just managing people in terms of their job performance or their school performance, is these like little dynamic circling dots. And then you can look at them on your phone, you can look at them on a laptop, and that's how they see kids. That's how they see kids in school. And so, analytics is working with Hewlett Packard actually on this artificial intelligence human capital investment, program and uploading skills and badges. So like this is the one version that they hope to attain. But then I'm kind of channeling like the Marinage, the indigenous resurgence aspect of this, is that there's two ways to go, right? There's two ways to go with education. And like he is really at this moment where it's about to scale up. And wouldn't it be amazing if somehow we can get enough people to get our heads together to advocate for not plugged in, authentic cultural praxis that would enable people to be in a position of contemplating a future that wasn't a cyborg remote robot future. And I think it comes out of that. So like he has this very interesting background, which I think is why I want to write a letter to him, I think. So that's that. Okay, so community schools. Not going to be popular for this, but in 2015, I was really concerned about community schools because I started looking into this new model of education that they were talking about that was going to be about decentralized, that there weren't going to be as many brick and mortar schools, that schools were going to be mostly about offering social services, which in my community in Philadelphia, it's not like we're in Alaska where you don't have ready access to things. I mean, you don't have access because of austerity, but it's not that you don't have access because of proximity. And so this idea of embedding all the social services into the schools was concerning to me for privacy reasons, and we'll talk about that later. But when I was looking at community schools, I was like, wow, when they say community, people are thinking like, oh, like the older gentleman down the block that runs the community garden, and the people who are doing, murals, or, they're thinking little C community, right? They're not thinking the United Way. They're not thinking Yale. They're not thinking, Boys and Girls Club, or these entities that are connected to large global capital systems. They're not thinking big C community. They're thinking little c. And so they're very deceptive in the way it's presented. And, what we're going to see later with data interoperability is that essentially Obama gutted FERPA, the Family Educational Rights Protection Act, which is like HIPAA, the health records protection, but for student records. And he essentially put in lots of loopholes that data could be used in an interoperable way and with community partners, and that could be used for impact investing. And so a couple years ago, a federal legislation passed called FEPA, which is the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. And that's what was going to set up the weaponization of the social safety net, the pay for success in all of the social welfare state. And they were doing federal testimony on this act. And, it's all the characters you might expect, but then Booz Allen Hamilton was advocating for this evidence-based policymaking, right? So like when the surveillance state is advocating for pay for success finance, there's a problem. And so, I was revisiting what community schools look like in this new context of pay for success finance. And, the one thing this was a good book. The woman's from Harvard, so I'm sure like punches were probably pulled, but it really opened my eyes to, it's Elizabeth Hitton's From the War on Poverty to the War on Crime. The Making of Mass Incarceration in America. And her thesis is essentially that in many respects, the war on poverty and the insertion of social services on which sort of the police state slid in really set up Black and brown communities for the mass incarceration state. And it's gone back to the 60s. Like it was that from the beginning. It didn't go bad. It was always inherently broken. And so if you understand community schools from this lens, it gives you some more clarity.
When you talk about community schools, you make me think of my good friend, G2 Brown out of Chicago, who runs the Journey for Justice Alliance. And my organization that I co-founded is a member of that organization. And I remember a part of the big campaigns that they were pushing were sustainable community schools, and getting lots of union support and other kind of nonprofit support. And they also, which is a really good story about G2 and the parent organizers. These are Black folks, by the way, in South Side Chicago. They staged a hunger strike because Rahm Emanuel, who was horrific, wanted to close the last school in their neighborhood. And so these families got together and staged a hunger strike that actually ended up saving the school from being closed. But they didn't get all of their demands in terms of they had presented a world-class educational curriculum that was actually designed by community with community to Rahm's administration. And of course, they scoffed at that. They let the school stay open, but they did not use the curriculum that was developed by the community. So when you talk about community schools, and probably some of the folks are on here listening from the Journey for Justice Alliance and others, it is kind of triggering because many families think that is the solution.
I mean, and it's hard because I was trying to get through those. I mean, I was following that hunger strike, and it was right at the same time that I was understanding the ways in which these impact investors were looking to use out of school time providers and cultural institutions to advance what will be, if we don't say no, these skills badges, behavioral badge systems through digital vouchers. And I was trying to say, their plan is that there's not going to be schools, but these community partners that, and I'm sure many of the people who are actually working at the community partners would never want this, but that it's going to replace school. Like that was the plan, was that these community partners would actually replace school entirely, other than the part that wasn't on the Chromebook. And, and I'll go through this later in terms of the learning ecosystem model, but it was very difficult because these partners, many of whom are offering, all the things that were gutted from the schools, right? The schools were gutted on purpose. And many of the after school activities and the wonderful things that used to be in schools were then outsourced to enable, I believe, what is going to be coming with the ecosystem model and these badges and digital vouchers. And the Ford Foundation had a whole report about that called, it was about museums specifically, but the future of museums and education. And they said essentially schools are going to die and museums will take over. And so I watched some of those, and the hunger strike, and I'm thinking, these museums who you wanted to partner with, who in that museum read that report? Because it was a Ford Foundation funded report. Somebody in these big museums knew that the plan was to make schools go away, and who was going to ever talk about it? And it was unimaginable. I mean, at the time, I kept thinking, I have a decade to talk about this. How will this ever happen, right? How will this ever happen? And then a year into COVID, I think we know how it's unfolding. But the United Way is very much a player in this. They're the coordinator of the social services and the community services, and they want the data. So this is an example of the data sharing agreement, and you can see where it says 2-generation families, 2-generation great families. They want both the parents and the kids. They want to control both of them. They need all of the data. That's all of the data. So this is what I was trying to tell people. I'm like, knowledge works. I mean, we talked about knowledge works in Cincinnati. This was their plan. This is school. How does that even look like school? They're like, well, school might have in-person learning, but it might have a lot of other things. You're just navigating that. And it looks like spaghetti. How is that school? And you think, well, what does that look like if you're a single parent? Maybe you don't speak English, isn't your first language, or you have a special needs kid and you don't have transportation. And how are you supposed to get your kid all over to a learning ecosystem to make them have education if they take the schools away? But this was the model they were advancing. And, increasingly, and this is what is challenging. And I know you're an advocate around the home-based program, but this is Pokemon Go education in a surveillance state, ultimately. So if we don't do regular school and the model is not being in school.
Yeah, but I mean, home.
But it's in a police state.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but keep in mind, I'm thinking about this as I think about how families can respond to this. And for me, I have kids who are small enough who will be impacted by this shit. So I'm not going to participate in this. And I think that what I'm advocating for, because also, and I don't know if you saw, but Harvard this summer, it actually got canceled, thank God, for white homeschoolers. But they were literally going to host a homeschooling summit to degenerate and say homeschooling is not safe and that we need to push kids into this system that you're talking about. And what I'm saying is families need to be advocating for homeschooling laws to stay the way that they are, or not be strengthened, because the homeschooling needs to balloon. To me, that's just one response to this, is not to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the homeschool community, I think there are certain interests that know what's coming and are not being fully honest with people. And then there are some that do. My friend Lynn Taylor in North Carolina is very clear. And so there's sort of a fracture within the homeschooling community of, here, do classical education on a Chromebook with us, but they're not actually servicing this. And I kept thinking, if people with larger platforms who have these long established relationships in their communities can start to wrap their minds around this learning ecosystem, that this is the plan, right? That this is what was the plan, and that it's happening in a way that both commodifies Black bodies and also reasserts this carceral system, the surveillance system, now with robot police. Not to be too dark about it, I think we could get more understanding. And that's what's so frustrating to have the education conversation in the current loop, is that, in person, not in person, online. No one's talking about this part. And imagine if the people of Chicago actually said, you know what? This KnowledgeWorks thing from 6 years ago looks like the plan. This is the thing we need to fight. Like, this is the thing we need to interrogate. I'm hoping we'll get there. I've been working on it for about 5 years, and maybe now's the time. Like, maybe now is the time. But this system is a racialized system, and I wrote a blog post about it after the incident at Starbucks a number of years ago, saying like the learning ecosystem model might be fine for upper middle class white folks, but if you're, you know, a Black teen wandering around trying to get Pokemon Go skill badges to, you know, for your career pathway on a device in a place that you're not welcomed, it could be very dangerous. And that the ethics of that have to be unpacked.
That's true.
You know,
That's
how
right.
do we keep people safe? I don't know.
So are the KnowledgeWorks people, do you think they're approaching these school districts and saying, hey, you know, I see that the teachers unions are beating you guys up, you know, maybe they're right, you know, maybe we, you know, just need to just keep schools closed forever. Here's a solution. Are they courting school districts, do you think, with this plan?
I mean, they've been working for a long time on competency-based education, and I'll get into that in a bit, but they don't even need COVID because they've been playing the goal of setting up discrete skills badges as a model, mostly digital and some with wearable technology for a really long time. So it's almost like it can just play itself out without them needing to really get into it too much. But, you know, I do think that, you know, I have a friend who's doing some organizing in New York City and advocating for teachers to not have a vaccine mandate for teachers, even though the union is insisting that the teachers all be vaccinated. And, you know, he's working in that space, and they're saying, well, you know, for in-person teaching, you have to be vaccinated. And so I think they are creating tiers through this biosecurity state of who is able to do what kind of work, right? And in that way,
I want to be clear that I'm also against forcing kids to come back to school to have to be vaccinated. I'm already seeing teachers online saying, I'm not coming back until the the CDC approves the vaccine for kids. There's no way you should not be able to make people do that. I'm sorry.
I agree. Well, and I would say most of these people do not understand that the larger program is ongoing synthetic biological treatments. They don't know that. They don't know the fourth industrial revolution is running on synthetic biology, and that we are all essentially just meant to, you know, I shared an image online on my social media yesterday of a robot car assembly line. And like, we're the car and the robots are the biotech, and we're just going to be processed indefinitely as potential threat targets until we become, you know, part of the internet of bio-nano things and synthetic biology creatures, which, you know, I think clearly everybody should have a right to refuse that if that's not what you want. It's not what people think. So I will say these are some clips from a page on wearable technology and virtual and augmented reality from the KnowledgeWorks, one of their white papers. They have a ton of white papers. You can just go there and see what's going on with that. You know, mentors are a big thing. So like, the teachers aren't really necessary. You could just have anybody be a mentor. And, you know, imagine that in these days of, you know, pedophilia and grooming, like what that is. I mean, I have a friend or a woman I was acquainted with whose spouse taught in the Detroit public schools, and they were having kids taken away from their certified teachers in second grade to go to the library and do literacy tutoring during the school day, not after school, during the day, with mentors. And the program was sponsored by defense contractors.
Did you see that AOC tweeted yesterday that she is signing up to be a mentor / tutor for
well, there you go.
Literally, when you said that triggered that tweet for me.
Yeah, no, and mentors, it's all about mentors. You don't actually need a real teacher. And sometimes the mentor can just be an avatar. It could just be like an algorithmic being with a cartoon. But, you know, look at this. I mean, again, it's racialized, this image, and Teresa like is getting some information, but she has this armband that's vibrating. That's getting her biometrics about her stress level. That's really disturbing. And then one of the images there, it talks about a smart ID badge. This is from at least 3 years ago. A smart ID badge provides access to community resources like libraries, maker spaces, learning hubs, and performs transactions on behalf of the student. Like it transfers money from learning accounts. It gathers distributed student performance data for learning records and provides the educator support team with learner location and task information. Think about
Wow.
that. That was 3 years ago. They've already planned out that they're going to have a digital voucher that's going to have your biometrics, that's going to have your payments, that's going to have your interoperable data, and and the support team will know where you're located. And then you're supposed to wear an armband, and so that they can tell if you're stressed out.
Why is this shit not all over the place?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, there are people who are far more prominent activists. Like, all it takes is to look at this white paper. I mean, and then some people might say, oh, well, this seems pretty unbelievable. But like at this point in COVID, like people should.
Do you think people really think this is a good thing? Like, oh, wow, this is great. Do you think there are people like that? I mean, because this is crazy.
Well, I mean.
Oh, here we go.
Well, so this is just what I'm talking about, the choice movement, right? Like, so, that when you get your smart badge, it's going to be weighted. How much you pay for certain education services is definitely going to, like I always say, like you're going to pay a surcharge for the Black Panther educational, module, right? They're going to decide what to price in free market. And so the Heritage Foundation here is already talking about education savings accounts, which have been targeting special needs students for a while, and talking about combining them with mobile money, right, and fintech. So, this is a white paper about financial technology and parent choice. But I'm.
How many years ago?
It's a couple years ago, maybe.
Okay.
So this is ESAs, right? It's not straight up digital wallets, but I'm matching this with this health passport, because I think that's what's coming. Is once the kids get their vaccination records, they're going to be on some sort of biometric passport. And oh, guess what? We can just layer all of that onto the biometric ID and your choice opportunity. But it will all be linked to your skills badges. And I think it will be weighted based on what the powers that be want to see happen. This is a program of the MacArthur Foundation. Again, they're very active in also the justice reform space.
Yes,
so
they are. They're in Chicago too.
Yeah, they're all, yeah, exactly. Insurance. This is insurance. It's a very important insurance money. That's where their money came from. Is that they have a program called they spun out Collective Shift. They worked very closely with Mozilla on developing the skills badges for like a decade, and gamification. And so in about a dozen cities, they have a program called LRNG. And it sounds so nice. They're like, the city is your classroom. Isn't this great? The city is your classroom. Except now it comes with like swarm drones and robot dogs or something, right? And so you're doing this Pokemon Go education model and getting badges, and it's all on your phone. Well, now I look back and I say, oh, well, the phone, that's your biometric passports. That's your health passport is on that phone. Like, that's why we have to do everything on the phone. And, I live in Philadelphia. I'm fortunate. I'm near the cultural institutions. Like, we might have a lot of badge-based opportunities that would be interesting, but who gets access to which opportunities, right? If you're a poor kid, what are your opportunities? Are you stuck on a Chromebook all day and occasionally a van comes and takes you to learn, how to do, a job that is not necessarily the job you would want to do? Like who's going to get the cush jobs? Who's going to get, the esteemed, and who's going to get the very challenging, difficult jobs? And I think that it's clearly going to be racialized again. This is not a liberating technology. And yeah, so this is just touching on it again. Pokemon Go, Niantic and the Knight Foundation are players in this. They're doing something called Augmenting Cities. So that's this layer of data over everything. And the global digital prison, everything has data attached to it. And that Niantic, which created Pokemon Go, they got their seed funding from In-Q-Tel, which is Michael Crow there at Arizona State. And he's the founding chair of In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA. So when we talk about like navigating this great city as learning, we have to understand that the augmented reality aspect of it is essentially a militarized technology that's being run by intelligence.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to ask. What is the CIA's interest in this? You feel me?
Well, they want to know all the things, right? I mean, it's an engineered society. That's what we're looking at.
Wow.
It's an engineered society. And it's racialized. But I mean, I think ultimately, and this is why I keep talking about this, is that it's going to be the billionaire class and a small group of
managers,
data analysts and, the facilitators of this, and then everyone else. I mean, unless you have several tens of millions of dollars, it's coming after you. It's coming after all of us. So that's why I feel really strongly that we need a united front, but that it needs to center the history of enslavement and genocide and the reservation and the residential school systems that are coming, because if we don't, we'll do it wrong and we'll just mess it up again. So hopefully we can wake up enough people about that, but yeah. So let's see. So this is the medicalization part that is really upsetting to me. And again, these images are several years old, 2015, 2016. They're talking about school-based clinics with telemedicine. I see the doctor on the screen. And
that's a part of the community school model too. They have that in Cincinnati.
But no one's going to tell you that, by the way, your health clinic in your school is going to be a doctor on a screen. They're not saying that part, and that it's going to be a social impact program. And no one's going to tell you that the teletherapy is collecting data to profile your kid's neuroticism, right? Mm-hmm. And no one's going to bother to tell you that once it's in a school and FERPA is gutted, that all of that is fair game for profiling and impact tracking.
And predictive analytics, yeah.
And the thing that really crushed me was about a year ago, I was looking through a LinkedIn profile, the woman who, she was the director of the crisis text line. And it turns out they leveraged all of the sentiment analysis of those texts to create corporate software to train call centers.
Wow. And
see, that's the stuff people don't know, when they get their kid, and who knows, clearly in DC, you were already seeing what was going on with the kids, them, advancing legislation that, kids who are 11 could consent to be vaccinated and kept from their parents, right? Well, who knows what kind of consent levels there would be for therapeutic services or health services and what would go on with kids in schools. And right. I hate to be that person, right? I didn't used to be that person, but once you see the bigger picture, you can't help but see it. These kids are very vulnerable. And if they don't have their families standing up for them, I think it's going to be a real problem. So anyway, like I said, in Philadelphia, you should be able to go see a real doctor. We should have public health clinics where you can go see a real doctor and not have it be on a screen. This is another piece. Achille, I had someone reach out to me this week whose child is actually at an elite private school for kids with learning challenges, and they were approached by UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, about a digital therapeutic. The big pharmaceutical companies are moving into neurological digital prescription programs. I have to just swallow. This is Achille. This was the first prescription pediatric video game for ADHD. It's going to be a huge market. And so what I'm saying is, if you start to medicalize children in your community school setting, what happens when the social worker starts to lean on your kid and say, you need this, right? Your kid needs to be put on a prescription video game. And if you refuse that, then you become a target potentially of Child Protective Services. And all of the kids who are going to be coming, the school, they're already really stressed, right? I mean, we have schools, the online education and the school model is meant to stress kids out and make them stressed and upset. So then this is their answer. So let me see.
Wow.
And then I mentioned this on I did a talk with Sergi of Green Med info about synthetic biology and transhumanism and digital vaccines. This is a digital vaccine program, a digital vaccine. This is digital therapeutics where they're using persuasive computing and neurobehavioral physiological modulation. This is out
of— What the hell is a digital vaccine?
So this is a game, like a game for kids to impact pre-diabetic conditions, to make them make good eating behaviors. And they're calling it a digital vaccine. It's called Fuya, and it's out of Carnegie Mellon with Friends Learn and Hofstra. And so they're developing all of these digital therapeutics as impact markets. But it's brainwashing. It's brainwashing with behavioral economics and neuroscience and AI.
Jesus.
So getting back to Connecticut.
What does interoperability mean? So
the interoperability means that all of this different kinds of data is all in a big pile, like a sortable pile, but it's instead of being in silos where your health data is separate from your education data, is separate from your parents, assistance information, social welfare data is separate from, your tax IRS data, like it's all separate. If you have it interoperable, it's like it's all touching, and that's what they need for these pay for success finance programs. Is they need, if they do an intervention on you that somehow remediates this bad outcome that they're creating their return on investment for, they have to have the data in place that will justify it. To say, we gave your kid the digital vaccine about diabetes, and then their blood glucose, level was good for a year. And that saved the health system X amount of money. Therefore, the investor in the digital vaccine program gets a certain percentage of the cost difference as their profit.
Terrible.
I know. Well, they are using people for profit in ways that are, again, it's this continuation of slavery, but they don't need our physical labor anymore. In fact, our physicality is a detriment to them. They really don't want us to even have bodies anymore, because then we might have an uprising. So they want to contain our minds and limit our bodies, and then mine us for data and process us with synthetic biology.
And so this makes sense in terms of Elon Musk Neuralink. Do you have any slides on that?
No, the synthetic biology stuff, I think I touched a little bit on that in the other talk, but I didn't go there yet. But okay. The medicalization and the health system. So I will say this National Interoperability Collaborative is really important, and it looks super boring, but I've known that this was important for like 2 or 3 years, because these individuals are part of something called Stewards for Change, and they're connected to Data Zone, which is the interoperable data system that was piloted in San Jose schools. So they were targeting Latino kids in San Jose. And and the data included pre-K, juvenile delinquency, foster care, early childhood education, all of these things. It was backed by the Packard Foundation. It was scaled with National Science Foundation money. And then Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla put more money into it to capture like hundreds of thousands of kids' data, interoperable data in the larger San Jose area. And then that model was scaled as the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. And then that model was scaled into this National Interoperability Collaborative. But in that next step, once it got to the National Interoperability Collaborative, it became less about education data and more about health data. And I didn't understand it 2 years ago, why it went from education data to health data. That this is probably 85% health data, and it's backed by Microsoft and IBM and all these major foundations. Why was it health data? Well, now we know, because it's the biosecurity state. And the National Interoperability Collaborative also has partners with the Fusion Centers and the National Centers on Crime and Delinquency. So there's a police state aspect to this as well. It's pretty intense. And so this National Interoperability Collaborative has a handful of states that are early pilot states, including, not surprisingly, like the state of California, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Connecticut, okay, are early pilots of this program. So that's important to understand for the hedge funds. So the National Interoperability Collaborative is there. And then, so again, in Sergey's talk, I've given 2 talks with him of GreenMed info, and maybe we can link to that, drop that in the description, but about weaponizing wellness and weaponizing social determinants of health. Again, which disproportionately affect Black and brown communities and communities in poverty, both for stress, trauma, lack of access to good food, environmental racism, all sorts of reasons that there are worse health outcomes, which is accurate, but pay for success finance is going to essentially weaponize all of those things and turn people into commodities of behavior. This image is from the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. Remember, I said it was from Data Zone to the Data Trust to the Interoperability Collaborative. And this is from 2017. It was launched. Priscilla Chan, Mark Zuckerberg's wife, was the keynote speaker. But at that event, to launch this data system, David Hausler was on the panel. And he's one of the premier genomic researchers. He put the genomic sequence on the internet. Okay, so it's the eugenics part again, and that's really important because genomic and genetic engineering is central. So the Connecticut Department of Social Services in 2018 gathered a whole symposium about improving health and well-being. And it was national, but again, it was hosted in Avon, Connecticut, and their Department of Social Services was they hosted it, right? And so it included individuals from MIT, from Yale, from UC San Francisco, which I just mentioned, and there were people from like McKinsey and Company. So they are getting ready to make this a major business, this biotechnology, biocapitalism preying on the poor, especially children.
And I just want to remind our listeners who joined after the beginning of the call, Biden elevated a geneticist to a cabinet level position the weekend before he was inaugurated.
It's going to be genomics and it's going to be eugenics. I mean, they want to turn us into machines and make money off of it. So the health systems in schools is really, really important. And it's not, again, I'm not discounting that kids have health needs, right? Like kids need access to vision care and dental care. They need access to all of these things. It should not be a pay for success human capital market, and they should not be data profiled for it, right? Like hands off of their health data, right? And it's going to increasingly, I think, be the electronic health records could very well be layered in with the education records. This is one of those mural things that they do at, these days at these conferences, but I just screenshot part of it, but there you can see, you will share your data, right? That is the goal. You will share the data, that it's about population health and it's data-driven health policy and interagency data sharing. So the interoperable data is key in the system. And this is a slide of Data Zone showing, again, achievement gaps. They're always talking about achievement gaps. Cardona is known for wanting to close the achievement gap. But once you define children as gaps and deficits, like that is just playing into these impact investors because they just see those children as data they will never close the gaps. They may make them narrower, they may make them wider depending on how they're hedging their bets, but they won't actually
They'll never
a world that kids don't need to be on a dashboard. Okay, so so this is an infographic I made a bit ago about the community school model, and I have like it in quotes and I have a question mark because again, if it were coming from the community and the community had total control of it, it could be a good thing. Like clearly you would want youth in an optimal world to have an educational experience that benefited from the overall community outlook, that was culturally responsive, that was locally controlled, that would give, that would have equal, equity, right? Like authentic equity to all the kids to be their best selves, right? Find their gifts and know how to give them. Be those kids. That is not what is rolling out with the United Way and these various actors. And what's so sad is that the community partners, most of the people working in the community partners want to do the right thing too. Like, I don't think most people go into social work going, like, I can't wait to like data mine children or families or be, feed them into impact markets. People don't do that. It's this larger structural machine that we have to contest. So the community school is this hub now, this hub for data extraction about families, about even workforce training of parents, because that's part of this 2-generation program, about supportive housing, about therapy and mental health data, and telemedicine, in addition to the academic data. And those are all going to be pay for success finance things. And that's what worries me so much about Dr. Cardona, is that he would be a person of his background, would be the kind of person you would want to advance a program that on the surface sounds like it's doing all the right things, but if you peel it back is actually really predatory. Does that make sense?
It's sick. I mean, but it just goes back to, like, I'll be honest with you, like, as an organizer and doing this work at the national level, a lot of times I've critiqued like the NGO space, but I've been critiqued by grassroots community people. No one likes to listen to grassroots folks because they don't, quote, have any expertise, right? We don't like to listen to real, regular, everyday people like our grandmothers, right? Like saying, like telling us this is how my grandmother would say, white folks ain't never have no interest in closing no gaps. What make you think they're going to do it now? And that's just a general, like, to jolt you. Like, they've been working on the achievement gap for how many years? 60 years, and it ain't closed yet. Now this new thing gonna do it?
Yeah.
Like just common sense, like that.
Yeah.
But people won't listen to people like that. Oh, because, I got a PhD and I went to Yale. And this is it.
Yeah.
We
don't have any time, though. I mean, literally, this AI situation, these Neuralink, this robot stuff. I mean,
I don't know if you saw
after
my
these
post.
children.
I don't know if you saw my post, but Nancy Pelosi is invested in Elon Musk's company. I posted it heavily.
I mean, I'm not. Well,
and so my point was to my Facebook followers, and people get mad at me, and some people have deleted me and things like that. My point was the government not saving you. Democrats, for Black people, and I'm going to say this, and I don't care who gets mad, they're not going to save your Black behind. They're investing in this shit, and there's no way they're going to pass a law or a policy to go against their investment. Wake up.
Yeah. I know.
And so anyway,
the thing is, like, I've been like saying this for 2 or 3 years, 5 years, some of it 3, get really more, like a lot the last couple years. And it seemed outlandish, except now I think it really is going to come to pass when they start rolling in the telemedicine carts into the schools, and doing the diagnostic checks. Now with COVID, they'll have a much bigger reason to have standalone health centers and to really get all of this profiling data on kids and their DNA, and your pathway is determined by your genomics, or maybe we could upgrade you a little bit with this injection, and
well, one of the things that I think that's going to happen, I don't know if you saw this article today, it was in Forbes. Bill Gates said, I'm just so upset that I'm being attacked by conspiracy theorists, and these are just baseless attacks. And so somebody's getting the word out. And so what they're going to do is use the power of the mainstream media to say that people who are getting out this type of information, which is clearly, like with your maps, you can literally click on each little thing and it links you to an article or to some kind of source, right, that you can read and make the connection. So it's not about conspiracy, right? Like, I mean, I think people should probably check out the definition.
Use the analysis, maybe. I mean, my husband's still saying I don't think it's going to happen, but
I mean, I think that you're right. Like, you can have all the data and come from a different perspective, and I see people do that. But I also see people that beat up on people, like, who are saying, I want to refuse this, I want to reject this, or I want to homeschool. If this is what's coming, then I'm just going to homeschool my children. But see, they're preparing even for that. Like, once this happens, you're going to have even more parents. You're already seeing it. Like, there's articles from Texas, there's articles from a couple of states where it says kids in droves, parents are homeschooling because they don't want their kids sitting on a fucking computer 8 hours a day talking about that school. They literally.
I started twitching this week, like, just from too much screen time. I know.
And
well,
so, and so some of the people who are in my network are a little frustrated with me because I won't get on the online school, let's keep all the schools closed train.
But I keep asking them if they know this, right? Like, if they knew that this was the end, that this was planned. I mean, the stuff I'm talking about was on the books 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, probably much farther, but I've been talking about it for 2 or 3 years and I didn't know how it would all unfold, right? But this was what they were saying. And now it's pretty clear how it's going to unfold. It's going to unfold because of the biosecurity state. So let me see. I know I'm kind of going on a little bit, but okay. So this, I'm curious what you think about this. So this is another thing I've been like struggling with, right? So, you know, even in, you know, my kid was in, you know, the urban district. Everybody's got, you know, metal detectors and school police at the doors. Like, even, you know, my kids' magnet school, like they all had, it was, you know, and I'm not about police in schools, you know, per se, but this narrative that you want more social workers, if you understand this context of that the social welfare system is going to be weaponized for impact investing. And that even the best intentioned social worker is essentially, their job is to do what the state tells them to do, right? I mean, like,
yeah, they could lose their license, right? Yeah.
I mean, they could be the best, and you know, some people are better than others about navigating that, but you know, they're incentivizing getting people into the system and not getting people out of the system. And so I know this has been another big campaigns about the unions, but maybe, you know, my question is, if you're going to ask for more social workers, then you darn well better get paid for success out of the schools. You know, and really be very clear about the data sharing and about these impact markets, because the market that exists is going to incentivize causing more harm to families.
You know what this is also indicative of is that the media, and maybe I should be careful how I say this because I don't want to indict everybody. I do think legitimately there are people who legitimately don't understand the connections here. But I also think this is indicative of and I think you talked about it in the very first video we did on episode 5, the media and investigative journalism. It seems like this is what you're doing, but it doesn't exist in the mainstream. What happened to the investigative journalists who would do exactly what you're doing, and like, this will be on 60 Minutes or some shit?
Well, I mean, it's all consolidated, right? Aren't there like 6 interests that own most of the mainstream media? And then, but even the alternative media, because like, I haven't
like Democracy Now.
Yeah. I mean, well, they get funding and they're actually solutions journalism. Folks should look that up. It came out of, it was launched out of the New York Times op-ed. But Gates, you know, all of the big foundations, Ford and Rockefeller, have essentially co-opted all of the media, not just mainstream. You know, when I saw it in Philadelphia, there was a gathering of solutions journalism here where they essentially just wanted to take over every single bit of, you know, everything from the like a small Afrofuturist podcast up to the daily paper, which is still a nonprofit. It's housed in a foundation, and get it all on board for solutions journalism, for poverty management, for impact investing. It's called, yeah. I mean, they literally have created a profit center. And it's called solutions journalism. You know, I have another piece where they were talking about, they've done it to documentary film, and they have investors and they consider it like tranches of investment. And they say, we're only going to invest in films that shape policy, like shape laws, They target specific coverage, films, and media to get what they want. And I guess we shouldn't be shocked, but some of the deepest intelligence about what's happening are like the national public radio stations. I mean, it's all the same funders that are doing all this stuff. Like
Wow.
I stopped listening to it like 2 or 3 years ago, but when I just finally just was done, but I would just listen to it just to get leads on what was coming, because it was just very thinly veiled intel on what they had up their sleeve.
Now we just got to rely on YouTubers like us.
I know, go figure. Oh, yeah, it's tiring. Okay, so this is I want to share this too. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about Paul Tudor Jones. I mentioned Robert Duger. He was with Ready Nation, and unfortunately, I'm not sure. Is there any way that the comment that's across the bottom, can we move that over or not? Oh, cool. All right. So these are this Council for a Strong America is kind of this weird shadowy group, and I would encourage people to look into it, because I think they've got like chapters all over the country.
I've never heard of this group. Is this a conservative group? Because that looked like Candace Owens, that black girl.
It's like the Chamber of Commerce, essentially. So essentially, they're
that's a right
train kids. So Robert Duger is part of the whole Jim Heckman Human Capital Bond program, and he set up Ready Nation, which is the middle one. That's not a picture of him, but Ready Nation is the workforce pathway program of these 5, and they're like, we are going to bring up the children so that they are fitting right in all of these groups, so that they are right with the police, so that they are right with the military, so that they are right with the workforce, so that they are athletic, which is the woman there, and that they are religious. And it's evangelical Christianity, actually, which is the purple, is the religion. And so, like, I saw this about 3 years ago when I first started doing work around the Heckman equation and Ready Nation. And it was really disturbing because it felt sort of fascist, like we're training the kids up to be in alignment with all of these things, especially seeing all of what was happening in the schools with behavioral conditioning. And, that kids were only worthwhile as far as they could be, managed as future soldiers and things like that. And it was disturbing. But again, what I'm saying is we look at like behavioral conditioning within the education context and within this larger 4th industrial revolution. Oh, by the way, we don't really need people anymore. You're just a burden. You can imagine how controlling all of this is, and that if the social workers are essentially doing, tapped by the state to do this work of making everybody agreeable with these 5 interests, that it's a scary program. So if you have a chance, I would encourage people to look into Council for a Strong America. The guy with the police, actually, I think he's in Houston, and his wife, I believe, is the head of the Girl Scouts. So that's going back to badges, right?
Jesus Christ.
Right. Right. Those badges go way back. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about competency-based education. And this is something that I was really involved with, early on in my education. We're looking at Common Core and opting out of standardized testing. The next phase, that learning ecosystem model, like that crazy Pokemon Go education version, can only happen if most of it is out of school. And this idea of having your education be out of school is like you have all this atomized knowledge and it's like a game. You just collect skill points and badges, and that's competency-based education. You have all sorts of discrete skill demonstrations that can be translated into badges, and they frame it as anytime, anywhere learning. So the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, it grew out of a student loan company. So this is very much tied with the debt finance entity. It was sold to
Sallie Mae.
It was sold to Sallie Mae, and then the proceeds created the foundation. So Nellie Mae Education Foundation has been really active, particularly in New England, in setting up this model of competency-based education. So this is sort of looking under the hood. This is Connecticut. This is from a document. It says that key to this, the learning ecosystem model, is that the elimination of seat time. Okay, so kids are no longer expected to be in school any amount of time. like in many states, you had a seat time requirement that kids had to be in school a certain amount of time. And that's why like you'd have to make up snow days, right? Because they were supposed to be in school a certain amount of time. Now, essentially, for the longest time in Philadelphia, we were hearing high quality seats. You know, the privatizing interests said, we need kids in high quality seats. We don't want them in those bad public schools. They should be in high quality seats. Well, now they don't want any seats. There's no seats. Everyone's just wandering around with a phone, earning badges. But the elimination of seat time is a key part of competency-based education, that you just are supposed to show your skills. It's not about actually showing up to school. And again, just touching base, this is this gig economy, the fact that the gig economy is going to be run by AI, that these badges of both what you know, your cognitive and non-cognitive skills, who you are in your mindset, are going to sort you. The AI is going to sort you by that. So imagine you have this online learning locker of skills, and the AI is doing this rapid, sort of, kids all over the, or, young people all over the world to do a particular task to code the digital prison. That is what they're imagining. This is MIT. I did some work on a company called Pymetrics, which is, again, about AI-based analytics, like workforce labor analytics, but they are framing sort of gamification as unlocking the potential of opportunity youth. So that's, again, read between the lines. That's Black and brown kids. Opportunity youth are generally students who are between 16 and 22, 24 maybe, and who are disconnected from school or work. So this opportunity youth are a big target of the impact markets. And this Pymetrics is this idea that they can use human resources, apps, and games to hook you into TaskRabbit types of work. Like, because you don't really need a full-blown education. You just need some badges to do some micro work jobs. Again, when I'm talking about the debt, like who is doing this? The plan is to have ongoing finance of your badge earning all your life. It won't necessarily be attached to any kind of school as we traditionally understand it. And this will be done through income sharing agreements. So this guy, his name is Christopher Riccardi. And
is that why Biden won't forgive our student loan debt?
Yeah, well, you have to be controlled by your debt. There's always going to just be more debt. In the future, it's going to come in smaller increments. So instead of like taking on $40,000 for a 4-year degree, you do an income sharing agreement and you have your wages garnished in exchange for paying back your training and maybe your social services. And this guy, Christopher Riccardi, he worked for Merrill Lynch, and he created these collateralized debt obligations, the CDOs with the mortgages, and he helped crash the global economy the last time. So this is the Wall Street Journal. So here he's going to do, they call it higher education, but really higher education moving forward is not going to be what we imagine it. It's not even going to be associate's degree 2-year college. It's not going to be 4-year college or graduate programs. It's just going to be these stupid badges. And it's going to be tied to your income share, that you go into micro deals on blockchain and share your wages. And that is going to be securitized as well. So
no wonder why the National Guard in DC, they're going to be here forever, because once people find out they got to do this, it's going to be some revolutionary stuff happening.
Keep waiting. I keep seeing all these pictures all income sharing agreements, and Riccardi is in this mix. It's this anytime, anywhere learning. So again, Nellie Mae is part of that. Blended learning, which is the ed tech in the classrooms. And this, I just found this, is talking about, this is Connecticut again, Makerspace Connecticut, which is an innovative ecosystem. It's these communities, right? Like, look at this great community space. You can come and do art and 3D printing and software and wood coding and all of these things. But you'll go to the makerspace and you'll get your digital badges, and that you can stack your badges. So stackable badges are what the hedge funds are going to be gambling on. And they're talking about this is a new collar workforce. So there's no blue collar or white collar. There's just new collar, because you've always got a collar. And it makes me think of, when I was reading the book, The Half Has Never Been Told, about capitalism and slavery, and especially the cotton industry. And they talked about the coffle, like the attachment. I think it was around the neck. And like, I'm sort of feeling like that's the new collar, is this blockchain. The collar is the coffle.
That was exhibited on Kunta Kinte in Roots when it came out in 1978. The collar that was around his neck to stop him from being disobedient.
So that's the new collar, the new blockchain collar. It's interesting to me that in Connecticut, there has been a move the past couple of years to consolidate all of the community colleges into like one system. So that's really sweeping, and they said it was going to be really expensive, and people were pretty upset about it. But I think you can imagine that is tied in with this badge system. That as my friend Paul, he's talked a lot about lately of jettisoning legacy systems. We're just clearing the deck. Anything that was the way things used to be, including up to even having a human body, that's just jettisoned. We're getting rid of it all. So community colleges, I was really frustrated because even with Bernie, like I think Bernie knows a lot about what's going on with this, and his wife Jane, because she's in this higher education space, and all of this free college. Well, what does this mean in a learning ecosystem, learn all the time, lifelong learning badge system anyway, right? It's interesting to me that they're targeting the community colleges here.
Wow. Did Bernie's wife work at a community college? I didn't know that.
She's in higher education and like youth services. So yeah, I think she ran a college, but then it went bankrupt. So she's aware.
Wow.
She's in that space. Both youth services and education.
Well, darn, Alison, you just crushing all of our dreams. I was a big Bernie supporter.
Well, she talked about like an IEP for every child. She's like there's an interview she had with this guy, Nikhil Goyal, like he's one of these, like, I think he's in on it too. And she's like, every kid should have an individualized education plan. And I'm like, that pretty much sounds like a bunch of badges in the learning ecosystem, if you ask me. So, and Vermont is very big into competency-based education. Like they're way down.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. And actually I saw the communication plan for Nellie Mae's rollout in Burlington and Winooski about it, and I'm like, Vermont is not that big. Burlington is not that big. You would have to work really hard not to know that was happening in your community.
Well, so that's why they start with the small communities, and then they eventually come to the bigger communities in the bigger cities. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And sometimes actually, and this is interesting in Lower Merion, like you would think, oh, they're going to target only low income, but they also like to target elite districts too. Because if they can groom them and say, well, everybody wants to be like you, why don't you adopt this? And then you can sell your brand to the aspirational districts, right? And so then, then the middle, and we're seeing that in Lower Merion, it's being taken over in that way. And they're sort of pitching it like, well, everybody wants to be Lower Merion. Like you can sell your brand of blended learning and, learning models to Havertown, because Havertown isn't quite as good as Lower Merion. And then you'll have like a commodity you can sell to other people. But meanwhile, they're stealing all the teachers' intellectual property in these online learning platforms. Like the teachers are doing all this work and they're just taking it and say, thank you very much. And then repackaging it for selling off to the side. So they're working both ends.
That's crazy.
And and low income.
I'm surprised the teachers union aren't fighting for the teachers' intellectual rights in this damn game.
Tell me about it. That's why I gave up. I gave up on it because I just couldn't, it's demoralizing. I mean, maybe they'll catch up. But this is just to touch on the bottom that Nellie Mae Foundation was sold to Sally Mae. And it started out as focused on student debt. It was a financing company. So this is always has to do with financing education. Again, it's about aligning with Common Core. Most people really don't like Common Core, again, standardized education, that you'll be learning all the time and that you're monitored learning all the time, 365 days a year, 24/7. That sounds great, right? Like we're just gonna, we're gonna have to live school all the time. This is talking about open education resources. So this model of online education that we're seeing, and this is what I spent a lot of time with, competency-based education is essentially for you to demonstrate you have a skill, and it's like you'll consume content and then do something online that proves that you got something out of it, and then it's a check a box that you have the skill. So really it's a consumption model, it's not a creation model, and it's about digital consumption of media. So these open education resources are central to blended learning and playlist education that for a long time were happening in schools, but I think increasingly are going to be happening in this out of school time environment. And they're being sold in colleges as an alternative to textbooks. Like, oh, you'll just put together a whole bunch of online open education resources and it's much cheaper than a textbook. But when you're interacting with these digital systems, they can get a lot of data out of it. And that's how they get paid back. So they'll know, like, how long did you spend with it? What time of day did you open it? What kind of people of what profile are using this resource? Is the teacher using this resource a new teacher or a veteran teacher? There's a lot of metadata that can be layered into the open education resources and the devices in which they are used. So that's really important to know. And Connecticut is doing that. So Cardona actually set up this learning hub to promote all sorts of different kinds of educational opportunities in relation to COVID. And it included online education resources, which you can see. This is a report from the educational technology sector in Connecticut, where they're promoting these resources in schools and universities. Okay. Now in 2017, oh, sorry. Let me stop. In 2012, so 8 years ago, there was this crazy talk, and I would encourage if people want to like go back and look this up. It was called Datapalooza, and it was the Office of Education Technology. And this company, Newton, had a short video that explained open education resources and AI and all these data points. And at one point, the gentleman who was presenting it, Jose Ferreira, who was the head of this company, said, we're going to have so much data, we'll be able to say, we know that this child does better on math when they eat waffles for breakfast and take the test on Wednesday. Like, he was talking about it like this. And it sounded, I mean, I remember trying to have a study group with teachers and they thought it was insane. But I don't think it is, because all of these data points in this map, they're talking about that as being personalized. But really it's about AI charting these children and like feeding them into these systems and making them into what they want the children to be. And then using all of that data as an impact market. And so the badges that the kids get through interacting with these open education resources end up going through this XAPI technology into a learning locker. And this learning locker is where the badges will be that AI will sort you for your work. So this is what Connecticut is up to. And this is actually from the document about the open education resources. And I posted this on my Facebook last night because I was just like horrified. You know, it said, oh, you know, what do you think are good resources? And the first dot, you know, the first thing listed was Cold Spring Harbor, their DNA Education Center, right? So that speaks to how clearly the whole synthetic biology agenda is right up there. But if people are not familiar, Cold Spring Harbor is out on Long Island and was like a center of eugenics, right? And, you know, I paired it with this slide about iGEM, which my friend Stephanie shared with me, the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition, which has been going on since 2003 in high schools and universities, is that like now we've got open education resources where kids are earning badges and they might be interacting with content that's like advancing eugenics and synthetic biology without even any kind of peer group or teacher or anyone to talk about it with and to sort of unpack what the bigger picture is behind any of this information they're consuming. They're just consuming it and then being asked to sort of either regurgitate some task that proves that they got something out of it, or perhaps perform with some wearable technology, some task system, or do an online experiment. But this is really, really serious because we are moving into this moment where people's ability to like process knowledge and the ethical implications of it are profound. And these kids are navigating it all alone. So I don't know. The badges are going to lead to something in the competency-based education called a mastery transcript. This is a transcript that's not going to be like classes. It's going to be these stackable credentials, including social emotional behaviors. And they are actually piloting the Mastery Transcript Consortium through very elite private schools. But in Connecticut, they actually incorporated a public school called Windsor Locks. And, by the look of it, it doesn't look like it's an aging school. So I'm really interested in why in Connecticut that the Mastery Transcript, these fancy elite private schools that are advancing this new form of stackable credential badging in place of a traditional transcript, how it is that they've come to include Windsor Locks in this. But it's in Connecticut, and I feel that that's significant for the picture. So,
wow.
Again, these badges are your whole life. Like, at least, how many days, sometimes I go, well, at least I don't never have to take the GRE again or the SAT or an exam.
Yeah, they're starting to get rid of the test. So damn, that's even connected to this, because a lot of people are, California is one of the biggest states, and the California, I guess, university system announced in 2020 that they were no longer doing SAT and ACT. Wow.
Because it's all going to be badges. And the thing is, like when I was doing this work around opt-out, this is where I realized that we had really been misled, was that the hedge funds, when this all happens and they have the pay for success and the ed tech and the real-time data and the wearable technology tracking people in the augmented reality cities, they need real-time data flows. The derivatives markets need data. The AI that runs these derivative markets need tons of data, real-time data, always changing to place the bets.
And guess what? Guess what they're doing now, Allison? They're getting it all from the virtual school right now.
Yes. I mean, they're training it. It's not quite there yet. Like, they need the policy infrastructure. They need to get everybody on the digital identity, but soon they're normalizing it. And, and it's lifelong learning. That's what they're going to say. Lifelong learning, anytime, anywhere. You're always going to be tracked by what badges you have. And you can stackable.
But can I say something? And this is what I think is really sick about this. They take ideas, novel ideas that come from people who are into like social justice. So like, for instance, I'll tell you, when I first started hearing about preschool promise, everybody has to invest in preschool. There was a Black woman who started the National Black Child Development Institute in the 70s. And she was advocating for that back in the 70s. Yeah. But she wasn't advocating for like this version of it. She was saying the data shows that if you invest in babies, then they will be successful. You know what I mean?
Right.
But now, and Amos Wilson is also another Jagna of mine. He's actually he's an African American. He's an ancestor now. He's passed away in the 90s. But the man was like a prophet. He always would say, every time we protest and we always push for things, he said, "Oh, you'll get it." He said, "You'll definitely get it, but it won't be in the way that you wanted it. It'll be still to serve the interests of the most powerful." And every time I think about like how people are celebrating that bail reform, right? I be thinking about you all the time. And I'm like, they don't need no fucking bail no more, because you're going to be digitized in prison. You're going to get a shock in your biometric when you leave the house.
Yep.
Damn.
I know. But I'm not giving up, because people are smart. I do think, but people have to learn to not trust the system. And I think that's a hard lesson.
You would think people of color would not trust the system, but we fighting each other and beating up on each other for not running to get the vaccine. We fighting and beating up on each other for not running and believing in all this bullshit.
I think people want for things to be better, than they are. They want to believe. It's a real strong desire. But yeah, I agree.
This is good. I hope people are reading this.
Long learning part. Like, you're never off the path. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that these hedge funds are going to put people on paths. You may get badges for skills you never get to use because the robots are doing all those jobs, or there's not enough work to do the job. So then you have to get the next badge. And that's what people need to understand, is that it's about badges, it's about debt, it's about controlling people. It's not about helping people fulfill their best selves. It's not, and it's one thing to fight for our own selves, but like really we need to fight for these kids, because this Japan moonshot program, the cyborg avatar capitalism by 2020, 2050, will be relieved of the need to have a body and a mind and time and space kind of craziness, the society 5.0. We can't let that happen. We really can't let that happen. And with every digital badge and all of this metadata and digital dust and whatever, it's making these digital twins and it's virtualizing
digital dust.
Life.
What the hell is digital dust?
Well, it's sort of like all your footprint, like all of, every time you're tapping on the keyboard, it knows your biometrics. Like they know your pressure points. They know, they can tell, they already have this, like if they're doing online school and college and exams, like they'll know if someone comes and logs into your account to take the test for you, even without a facial recognition, because they know all of it. Like they know how hard you hit the R key. You know what I mean? They know, and we've even seen that last week. They were talking about Microsoft patenting the chatbots, right? Using your text and sentiment analysis to develop chatbots of actual people. That's all the digital dust. So, okay, virtual reality. So this is part of the haptics, control systems, the remote robotics. It's not just for fun. They're coming into the schools and they're saying, oh, Google Cardboard and these virtual reality headsets. And they're really cool because look, you can go on a field trip to the national parks that you're never going to get to go to now because, you're locked down. Or, the parks are burned up or the glaciers melted or whatever, but you can go in your headset, you can earn badges in your headset. And it's for this, here's the Davos. This is 2019, Globalization 4.0. So that was the theme. That's the remote robotic labor. This is a book, they're talking about automation, the gig economy and welfare, so that, this is labor economics. They've already got it planned out. This robot here in Japan is being operated by disabled people. And actually, I spoke with Sophia Smallstorm. She's very interesting. She has her own, I'm not sure if she has her own podcast. She does interviews and subscription service, but she's very smart. She's shared a lot with me about piezoelectric energy, human energy harvest. And she said, Alison, I was listening to your talk with Sayer, and I'm realizing that as more people are actually become vaccine injured and people's, the synthetic biology and then and we'll just be operating our avatar robot, for quote unquote life. And that's a pretty scary thing. But my friend Tanya, once she told me, I think there's a Bruce Willis movie about that like your avatar goes out and walks around and you're just stuck in your house. But Japan, they're already piloting that. And they're the ones who are looking at the Society 5.0 robot world. Let me see. So virtual reality can also be open education resources. It's not just reading an online book or doing an online game. It could actually be virtual reality as OER. The OER, you can earn badges in the virtual reality that will go to your learning locker. So this is from that Ford Foundation report actually about museums and education, Zakia, about, and I'm just going to read this because I think it's
please do.
2014. So, okay. So the decline of FTE, full-time employment. Traditional schools are designed to prepare students for traditional jobs, which are increasingly rare. We are seeing the decline of full-time, long-term employment and the rise of the gig economy, one in which more and more people are freelancers, piecing together bits of work. Online services like Odesk, TaskRabbit, and GigWalk facilitate matching workers with employers more quickly and efficiently than the old-fashioned temp agency providing tools for anyone to patch together an income from diverse bits of work. Okay. If in the future, more of our children grow up to be task rabbits, that may affect the kind of education, training, and real-world experience they need to succeed in the odd job workforce.
Isn't that something?
So that's what I keep saying. Like, that report has been out since 2014, and I was sending around to lots of people saying, this seems really disturbing. I mean, in that report, again, they said that the museums would take the place of schools because they're very good at personal learning. And, you know, what's coming is this stuff, it's called XAPI technology that will upload your so
you kind of cutting in and out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. The Learning Record Store is connected to augmented reality, classroom training, business, online forums. Oh, sorry. I wonder if I should try to go relocate if my, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you. It'll cut out for like 30 seconds and then like, it's not been that bad as it happened a couple times.
Maybe I'm hitting some touch points. I can try to go down to my living room and see if the connection is better.
It's okay. Keep rocking. You good.
Okay. So anyway, simulations, videos, games, it all goes in the Learning Record Store. And for your TaskRabbit job to be sorted. So that's solutions for the military. And I would encourage—
Can you start back over at the beginning of this one because you cut out again? The beginning of this.
You know what? Let me see if I can walk down. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe the connection is bad in my living room. I'll go down to my— sorry. I'm gonna just watch where I'm stepping so I don't fall.
Yeah, we don't want you to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Let me get my stack of books. This is my podcast stack of books for the computer.
Okay, no problem. You're good.
All right. Sorry, guys. Let me see if this is better. This is closer to the router. Okay. So we can track it. It's part of XAPI technology is what gets your the information from a device that is not a typical laptop into the system, into your Learning Record Store. So there was something that preceded it called SCORM, Shareable Content Object Reference Module, also military technology. But SCORM could only get stuff from a laptop. It couldn't get stuff from wearable technology or a phone or an iPad. So XAPI can get it from all these other things. And I would really encourage people, if they can like look up this video, it's just on YouTube. It's really like 2 minutes long. It's really short, but slow it down and look at it a couple of times because it's an analog, like a flip clock. That's what those 3 boxes are for. And it talks about, it shows in the demonstration all of the different digital streams that are collecting information about you for your Learning Record Store. From emails, from audiobooks, from simulations, the source of it and the badges that were acquired. And it's pretty fascinating to watch. So, but ultimately, it says learning happens everywhere. So again, it's this decentralized model, but that we can track it, right? That the learning happens and is being tracked and watched. And, you know, it disturbed me a couple of years ago.
I resent these people because the learning happens everywhere is a homeschooling model. Like traditional homeschoolers say that, and they spin it, man. This is terrible.
And it's military. So I mean, 2 years ago, I was really upset by this. And actually, when I was coming back from my trip in South Dakota, this company that developed this Problem Solutions is actually in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's in Western Pennsylvania, and I stopped there on my way back and I saged it. I did a sage cleansing outside Problem Solutions because I'm like, we do not consent to this. We do not consent to your competency-based education, to your badges, to your human capital program. We don't consent. And actually there was like a little bench outside, and I just sat there, and it was mostly closed. But it's like the banality of evil, right? It's in this like small, mid-size Western Pennsylvania town in an office park, next to Lockheed, surprise, surprise. And that's where this is going on, but people don't consider it military technology, and they might even think it's fun, except for it can be tracked. And now that we understand the larger context of what the tracking means in terms of censorship and everything else, and the implications of being tracked and traced and profiled. So this is, I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail, but I made this map. It's of virtual reality. It talks about the open education resources. It talks about that a lot of the virtual reality and the gamification is tied to military simulations. A lot of these technologies are developed to track soldier performance and simulations. I have a friend, Joseph, who works in this space. He says, yes, there's a lot of fluidity between the video game design companies and the defense contractor simulation companies. It's very blended. And gamification and behavior management is a key piece of it. And a lot of the virtual reality programs are actually being piloted in an education context through UNICEF, internationally through humanitarian aid. And a lot of them are being targeted specifically at Africa.
I'm not surprised. The target has always been Africa, raping them of their natural resources for cell phones and everything else.
Yeah. And so this is what it looks like learning everywhere, right? We're training kids in VR headsets to work in Amazon warehouses. And, this tablet, this is from JCA Solutions, is a defense contractor in Orlando. And this is talking about capturing learning in virtual reality and augmented reality. So the tablet is essentially an industrial system where it's going to show you how to operate that part of the machine. And this system is only possible because with your haptic robotics or this new globalization, you're never going to actually understand the machine you're running or what it does or how it connects. You're just going to show up to work, quote unquote, like maybe that's in a haptic suit, and they'll tell you what button to push. So it doesn't involve intellectual thought. They don't want you to know how to run the machine. They just want you to show up and do what they tell you to do.
It would be in the benefit of the masses to learn these machines, no?
Well, they don't want you to learn the machine. They want to keep everybody only knowing. I mean, it's just like
it's control. Yeah, it's control. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're not supposed to teach slaves to read. You're not supposed to. And actually, one of the virtual reality programs in Africa, they said that they were going to do coding with gestures, and that essentially they said those kids would never learn how to read. That they would just use gestures to code this virtual jail, I guess. And again, I'm touching on this because OER is something that's being used in Connecticut. And again, think back to Dr. Cardona at the beginning. He's in this virtual reality headset. Like, this is what he is modeling, is this new program.
Wow.
And that's why this is important. This is a diagram that shows the information that can be captured from a virtual reality headset and the haptic controllers. And most people do not have any idea that those are data gathering devices, in addition to having an experience that the machine is learning the person.
Machine learning, that's the new thing.
Yeah. And so this particular slide share was talking about it was a competency-based education model, and the program was to have a child learn how to properly pet a dog. Like, that was the example. And so there were a number of steps on how to properly pet the dog, and you had to go through all of the steps properly to get the badge, in the virtual reality suit. And this is what's coming. Is, if you're doing this idea of project-based learning, which I'm sure is going to be advanced, let's don't do that horrible kind of education that we did before. We'll do projects. Well, does it come with a VR headset? Does it come with haptics? Does it come with wearable technology? Is it tied to pay for success? Is it tied to badges? These are all questions that we have to ask, because increasingly these projects are not even going to be happening in schools. They're going to be happening, maybe they just ship, the price point drops for these cheap headsets that are probably going to burn out your eyes. Then they'll just send them to your house. Maybe they'll make you pay for them with your income sharing agreement and do the training that way. So yeah, and so this is the newbie in VR. So that's one of them, and that is a very powerful image. And I just wish everyone would really absorb that, because what we're talking about with that, the capture, inject, trace, erase, is that the senses and the capacity of people to actually interact with the real world is being captured by that virtual reality headset that is across her eyes. She can't see the natural world and that the infinity symbol there. It's very intense, that it almost feels very like demonic, that the imagery that's used in that picture. I mean, not the individual, but the way in which that person is conveyed and captured. And that the virtual reality, they talk about these immersive experiences actually changing your identity. And they talk a lot about empathy, using it for empathy, social impact investing, empathizing with refugees, or empathize with people being bullied, or empathize with racism. But really, they are programming people with these technologies, programming their brains, and they're actually to the point of even using virtual reality to do a behavioral experimentation.
Wow.
They're programming. It is literal programming. So what's going on with the betting? I've shared this image a couple times, but I talk about that this is fracking. Like, we are fracking children, fracking people for data, fracking their souls to manage and reprogram them. And as Eric Schmidt said, the next most valuable resource is data. So we have to understand that all of these educational systems are about pulling out data. It's interesting that the current governor of Connecticut, his name is Ned Lamont, and he actually made his fortune in distance learning and selling cable television to universities. So that's interesting, right? He's in this space, Ned Lamont. He's in the digital telecom space. He worked for, I think, Comcast, not Cablevision early on, and then created his own company. And then he has partnered in Connecticut with Ray Dalio, who is the hedge fund manager. Bridgewater Associates is actually the world's largest hedge fund. So, and the state of Connecticut really cultivated Bridgewater to stay and expand in the state. And then the Dalio family pledged $100 million to the Connecticut schools, but they set up a program, and then they said that they had to be exempt from all disclosure and ethics rules.
That's like the vaccine companies are exempt from lawsuits if it deforms people and if it kills people.
Yeah. So they set up this, eventually it fell apart this past year because people fought back about the non-disclosure and the ethics issues. And Dalio said that he's still going to give the money to the schools, but that it's not going to be matched by the state. But again, this is Cardona's environment that he's operating in. These are the individuals. Paul Tudor Jones is on the one side in the tie. Ray Dalio is next to him. Paul Tudor Jones is in the green outfit. He has Robin Hood Foundation as his philanthropic effort, and there's a picture of him, below that with Bill Gates. So they're both hedge fund managers. They're both operating out of Connecticut. There's also hedge fund managers in northern New Jersey too, which is, in the mix as well. But these are the people who are going to be running the bets on pay for success in ed tech and behavioral engineering that is coming. And, Bridgewater Associates, they don't have a super great reputation even among their staff. And there have been a number of labor lawsuits filed against them around surveillance of the employees. It says that Dalio is a celebrity and has been a speaker at the World Economic Forum a number of times, and that the general counsel to the company was the current director of the FBI. Super influential people.
What? The current director of the FBI?
Yeah, so this was a couple years ago, so I have to just check the timing of this, but this is from the New York Times, and they're saying it was founded in 1975, so it's an old fund. It manages billions of dollars for these pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. He's a speaker at Davos, and people like to be connected with Bridgewater. And Comey. Okay, for a time, Comey, the current director of the FBI, was the general counsel.
James Comey, you know, he's at Howard University now. I don't know if you know that.
No, I didn't know that. Wow.
Crazy.
Well, so there we go. And then the other thing about Bridgewater is that they actually this was as of 2015, so I'm not sure if the UN ended up diversifying their portfolio, but that the pension fund of the United Nations was managed by Bridgewater, which is really significant because this is all aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, this ESG investing, and the virtual reality and the tablet-based education is all to run the pay for success investment deals that are running through the Sustainable Development Goals. It all has to run through the technology. So, you know, you can see the layers and how it is wrapped up in itself. The, you know, Bridgewater, the United Nations, the technology, Lamont, and it's all happening in this little state, you know, and again, you know, Dr. Cardona, who's like from Meriden Public Schools, is in the middle of all of it. Dalio gave 60,000 laptops to the kids in Connecticut for distance learning when COVID started. And they were they launched, he and his wife, Barbara, in 2015, this RISE network. So the RISE network was advancing the data dashboards that we talked about before. These were used in Meriden schools where Cardona was working. Again, it wasn't his choice. He wasn't the superintendent, but he was there as sort of an administrator of instruction and achievement gap. So clearly that is generally always about the data dashboards. And these are the Dalio's data dashboards. And, you know, I will just say that Paul Tudor Jones, who was with the Tudor Investments, Robert Duger, I had mentioned before, worked with Jim Heckman on this Heckman equation and the pre-K space. And Paul Tudor Jones was also with the Robin Hood Foundation that did a lot of work managing impact investments in Harlem Children's Zone and refining this cost-benefit ratio, which you can see there at the bottom. So Tudor Jones actually also backed the first Invest in Kids working group that was Art Rolnick and Robert Duger and Jim Heckman that got the whole ball rolling for the early childhood investments, which again, Cardona is involved in the early childhood space, advocacy space in Connecticut. So all tied into the hedge funds. And I will say when we're talking about the badges, again, they talk about stackable credentials. We know about these learning lockers. A lot of the education moving forward is going to be framed as career and technical education, which again, with the emphasis on four-year college and debt, you know, there has been a lot of swing back to people saying like, no, we actually need the trades. We need people who, not everybody has to do four-year college, which is true. But at the same time, the work-based technical training that they're going to be advancing is mostly going to be coding and other type of work. It's not actually that your people are going to learn how to work on cars or do HVAC or, you know, do, you know, food science or that sort of thing. It's going to be these very technical baseline jobs, and that the work-based learning will be aligned to the education system. That's the pay for success will be part of this career pathways, and that there will be continual reskilling debt as people lose their jobs and get the next jobs with these income sharing agreements. So the badges and the digital credential lockers are key to both holding the credentials and holding the debt, your permanent record. Social emotional learning, that's something that folks are betting on. The Department of Education in Connecticut had a whole social emotional learning hub. There are lots of interest at Yale University that are involved in social emotional learning and child development. As I mentioned in a previous talk, Teachers College of Columbia, Clive Belfield there, he developed an equation to give a return on investment, I think 11% on social emotional curriculum. So again, this is a behavior modification as an impact market. And connected with this, you know, there was a study that said that essentially they said that critical thinking isn't as predictive of academic success as other behaviors like self-regulation. So they want these kids to be self-regulated to a really horrible system so that they can make money off of them through managing the social emotional learning curriculum. This is Yale. The Yale School of Medicine has Elevate, again, a policy lab to elevate mental health and disrupt poverty. So again, the poverty management is a key part of pay for success investing, and this Yale Child Study Center. Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, again, sort of the tyranny of the Ivy League. They developed something called Ruler, which is about like mood meters and tracking kids' emotions, which we can imagine under this whole year, lost year of stress and uncertainty. Kids, everybody's mental state, but particularly kids, is not great. And so the Center for Emotional Intelligence is creating a policy infrastructure to turn that into an impact market. And then, we've seen, even leading into COVID, in many schools, the push for behavioral analytics, classroom behavior management systems, much of which were tied to token economies and Skinnerism, behaviorism. And this is just one of them. It's TaskRabbit, or Red Critter, sorry, it's Red Critter. They're mapping kids' social or non-cognitive skills. I'm getting a little tired now, but they're mapping all of the kids' skills, and they even have a home edition, which now makes perfect sense. I didn't understand early on why they had a home edition. It's because we are going to be at home, and they zing points with wearable technology to their wristbands. So it's just really barbaric. Cardona was a member of the United Way in Meriden, where he was, working in the schools. The United Way is a key player in the social impact space. They are advancing a program called ALICE, which is managing the working poor, assets limited, income constrained, employed. So that's the working poor. There is an ALICE program in Connecticut. And so while the United Way may seem really innocuous, something that every civic-minded person just joins the United Way, they're actually really central to the data interoperability program, the collective impact program, and this management of the working poor. And the Casey Foundation is part of this as well, this 2-generation, again, controlling families by controlling kids, holding kids hostage to their parents, that essentially they're saying that, you get better outcomes if you're managing parents' career pathways for the children, but it's all about the data analytics, integrated data systems for these 2-generation initiatives, and the data experts are going to be managing all of it. In Connecticut, this is the family recovery bond that I mentioned about the women who were in addiction and child protective services. So this was the social impact bond pilot. And again, BNP Paribas was investing in these bonds. So these women and children were a global commodity. And this was part of this Pay for Success project, again, in Connecticut. But I talked with you about this a bit yesterday, that in Chicago, this idea of the social impact bonds tied to different analytics, including 3rd grade test scores. The Chicago social impact bond with Goldman Sachs actually had a parent academy component. So, that didn't really hit me till later, but with all of the home visits and homeschooling, this idea of controlling families in their home is really important. And so something that started off in the 1960s that might have seemed very innocuous here, that they called the CPC model in Chicago. I'm trying to see what it's now funded by Pritzker, as a commodities program. So that the monetizing family relationships is really key in all of this. And yeah, early childhood, we've talked about Strive. There are 4 different Strive Together programs. Strive is a spin out of KnowledgeWorks, and they're advancing cradle to career pathways and collective impacts. You can see here, they're connected to United Way, and they're connected to J.B. Pritzker, and it's all linked to impact philanthropy.
Isn't Pritzker the governor of Illinois?
Yes. And there are also Pritzkers in the Bay Area who are backing Newsom. There's another arm of the Pritzker family there as well. And I can't remember, they're in hotels. I can't remember which hotel. Is it Hyatt? It's one of the big hotel. But I mean, Penny Pritzker was the Secretary of Commerce for a while. And that's why, Obama, it's the commodities market. That's what Chicago is. It's commodities trading. It's futures trading. That Heckman and Pritzker and all of the Educare all started out in Chicago is no big surprise. CME, the Commodities Market Exchange, is a major player in all of this, and connected with Robert Duger, actually, in Ready Nation.
Wow. So
Strive has 4 different outlets in Connecticut: Waterbury, Bridgeport, Norwalk, and Stamford. And again, you can see it's that the imagery carries that this is a racialized project. The cradle to career outcomes, each of these is an impact market. Each of these things on the timeline is something that they're going to make money on. And you can see, and this map is probably a couple years old, but the spread across the whole country. I guess maybe the upper Midwest is the one holdout there. The data dashboard, folks, Social Solutions is one of the data dashboards for the social welfare state. That is connected to Steve Ballmer. His wife, Connie, is on the board of Strive Together, and they're connected in Blue Meridian Partners, which is doing early childhood.
Oh, Blue Meridian Partners is doing what?
Well, they're doing the investing in the early childhood impact space, among other things. So this is Ballmer in Texas with Commit. Commit is another Strive Together program, and there's a lot going on in Dallas with that, with Goldman Sachs. But so here's David Wilkinson again. He was the one who left the Obama White House working on social impact finance for Obama. He went to Connecticut to do the early childhood work. And again, we have Cardona. It says here that he's part of the Birth to Grade 3 Leaders Council, whose work it is to advance effective early childhood programming to help children be prepared for school. Now, did Dr. Cardona develop all of this? He certainly did not, right? And do we all want kids to have what they need, birth through third grade? We definitely do. But it's important to understand the landscape in which he is operating. And it's a very, very treacherous landscape. This is just a fact sheet talking about this outcomes rate card. And again, you hear rate card, a rate card pilot. That's how they talk about children, right? I mean, children aren't rate cards. You know, maternal health disparities are not things you put on a rate card. That's something for a financial market, and it's gross, and it should be seen as gross. The app below is one of the programs that was being evaluated for this was the Nurse Family Partnership. It's all over the country. And again, it goes back to the 60s, but now it's been tied into these data analytics programs, and they're pushing things called Goal Mama, which is a behavior tracking app for low-income women on pregnant women on Medicaid, to track their behavior, to make sure they're doing the right behaviors for their children.
These people are sick.
You know, it is sick. And, you know, I spoke with the state treasurer of South Carolina about it because he was fighting it there. And, you know, we're trying to figure it out, but like two white people shouldn't be the ones to try to tell people, you know, we're trying to tell people, but like, we can't carry that movement, right? Like, it has to come from the people. But how do we tell people, right? Like, that's what I'm hoping the words will get, because there will be people who will fight against this, but it's not always who you expect. So
Right.
this is essentially talking about these early childhood finance programs being tied to asset-backed securities. And that's the gray arrow there, the asset-backed securities piece. There's Pritzker. This is in DC, actually, at the EduCare in DC. I don't know if you knew that there was EduCare in Washington.
No,
He's there.
I've heard of their organization, but yeah.
Yeah. So he's in DC. These are the surveillance play tables to track the social behaviors. And here is Pritzker and Heckman in California pitching early childhood impact investing to investors and foundations in California. And it's all about, you know, building brains. They're talking about actually building brains with neuroengineering. But who gets to build babies' brains, right? And to what end, and with what technologies, and for what reasons, and to what end, right? I don't think we should be building babies' brains to be part of a robot society. Is that how they're building the brains? You know, and children are more than just brains, right? Like, that's gross. If you look at a child and you say, oh, well, that's just a brain to be engineered, that's not a humane proposal. And I'm almost done. This is a bit, he was also, Cardona was active in the Boys and Girls Club. Here it says he's part of, you know, United Way and the Boys and Girls Club. The Boys and Girls Club has a program called My Future. They're advancing badging and a lot of digital technology and blended learning and social emotional profiling in their programs, their out of school time programs. And again, you can see it's very tech heavy. They've partnered with Comcast. Comcast is partnered with Khan Academy, and they're doing Internet of Things. So, I mean, does that look like an enjoyable experience for that little boy? Like, it just looks horrible to me. Like, capture, inject, trace, erase, right? Like, he's captured in this thing, and they're injecting Khan Academy maybe, or some system, and erasing who he is as a being with the mask and the setting. It's just horrible. And then Disney is part of this. So the Black Panther movie, and they're going to build on STEM, not telling you that STEM was a lot of militarization and cybersecurity, cyber warfare, but layering that in with the Boys and Girls Club, with the media tie-ins. Again, Disney is all part of this. They're one of the main funders behind the UNICEF Innovation Fund that's pushing virtual reality on people and on children in Africa. And Hewlett-Packard is also involved with Boys and Girls Club. And they're delivering their tablets there. And again, they're tied to Yet Analytics, which was the picture from the very beginning of treating children as these little dots to be weighed and measured and moved around. And they've got essentially a data command center that they're managing education as a data command center, which is very military language there, with a artificial brain technology to manage human capital, these human capital data challenges. So everything that we're talking about is embedded in this larger system of militarized finance and AI and predictive analytics. And just in closing, I want to emphasize, like, one of the major employers in Connecticut, it's finance, insurance, and real estate. And insurance is dominant. Hartford in particular, the Hartford insurance company, I believe. And that if we understand the historic continuum, that one of the things that happened that really triggered the abolition movement in the United Kingdom was the Zong massacre. And that happened when enslaved people, there was an insurance policy taken out on them as living cargo. And when the ship hit the doldrums, and this is something that Dr. Justin Leroy talks about in his talks, that it hits the doldrums, right. And that's such a good talk. And maybe we can link to it in the description. But he talks about that because these captives were insured for drowning, but not for starvation or dehydration, that they started to throw people overboard in order to collect the insurance payment.
And and nobody was prosecuted, right?
Right. Nobody was prosecuted. And then that started people, white people, to really think about the horrors of the slave trade. And it triggered that. And so I think if we understand hedge funds, if we understand the individuals like, Mr. Dalio, who's looking to, set up programs of technological surveillance in public education systems without ethical or being open or transparent, that would advance his bottom line in the lines of his pension, people investing their, whose pension funds they're managing, like the United Nations, that are running these digital takeovers of the global education system for this robotic future. Like, I think what we need is an abolition movement against these surveillance technologies and against the human capital program, period, and especially against blockchain identity, because that is running everything. But, I just want to close that, I do think that there is something greater than just us and these Zoom calls. Like, there is a power behind it, and this is an image from Puerto Rico, but that the ancestors are there, that there's a spiritual presence, that there's a sacred presence, and that even though this might seem really, really overwhelming, the vast majority of humanity on the globe would not want to allow this to happen, and if they had the information and it were actionable. And that's what I'm sort of asking for help with. And that's something that Ulysses and Brother Shamari have been helping me with, is to try to do it in a way that doesn't take up a 2.5 hour Zoom call, so that we can get it to a point that people have actionable information and that they can protect their economies, protect their children, protect the unborn, protect nature, because we're all interconnected. And so thank you.
No, thank you. This is, for me, I've been really sitting with a lot of this information, since you and I have started talking. And like I said, the universe actually literally connected us. And because I had never heard of you before, and I'm sure you had never heard of me, but, my spidey senses have been tingling for years, and I haven't been able to really like connect the dots, and you have like done that. Like I've talked to people who have watched the previous like videos that you and I have done, and people are still commenting on them. Like people are still watching them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I do think that there is some consciousness raising that's happening. But one of the things that I keep hearing from people is like, well, what do we do? What do we do? And that reminds me that we like what they really want to do. I mean, you know, we're already somewhat controlled insofar as like we wait to be told what to do.
Right.
Like we wait. Like I literally see, and social media has revealed so much to me. I literally see people say, well, this isn't a reputable site. This is a blog. You know, I have to wait until it's in the New York Times before I can believe it. Can you imagine? I have to wait until it's in the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And then it becomes real. And I'm like,
I mean, that's like the education system, though. I mean, that's
it's the conditioning.
I mean, when I went up against Naomi Klein and I said, well, look at the primary source, like go to the you can, maybe you look at it differently than I look at it. That's fine. But look at the actual source and use your brain.
That's what's missing. And they have been doing years of conditioning to get people not to think. The K through 12 education system, I argue, especially in poor communities, are all about compliance. Yeah. They're really not about unearthing natural intelligence and questioning, Socratic questioning. It's not about that. It's about line up in a straight line, wear a uniform. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Turning the kids into robots.
Exactly. And so now with this IVR stuff that you're showing, like I've just been sitting back processing, like
military stuff is deep. It is deep. And, you know, a lot of it's in Georgia. A lot of it's in Florida. A lot of it's in the South. You know, it's in communities, Atlanta. You know, imagine if the folks of Atlanta figured this out, you know, like got and understood what it was. The nature of warfare, like I do believe that there is a war on natural life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, critical thinking is being dismissed as conspiracy theories oriented. You know, you have no proof. And people, and I found like when people say there's no proof, they literally mean because I didn't see it on MSNBC. That's what they mean. I'm serious because I pushed them. Like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean there's no proof? There's no, well, this is not a reputable source. I cannot tell you how many times people have said this isn't.
I like being disreputable.
You know, and you mentioned something earlier, like, you know, I think about all the past atrocities, right? Now, the Tuskegee experiment has been in the news a lot since the vaccines have been released. And the same kind of thought that went into the devising of the Tuskegee experiment is the same kind of thought that's going into all the information that you're sharing now. The people who are organizing this are very shrewd. They know what they're doing, and they're prepared to take the money and run. And then in 20 years or 10 years, hopefully, or shorter than that, when people finally wake up and lawsuits are filed and all of this stuff that people go through, we're going to get a president like Bill Clinton did in 1994 that's going to stand up in front of the American people and say, I'm so sorry. You know, I'm so sorry. And they're not. They're not sorry. And this is what I want people to understand. Like, this is a continuum of the atrocities. That's why I hate when people, now I got academics on my page. Well, you know, I don't know why people, they're like, you know, picking out the differences. Well, the Tuskegee experiment wasn't about actually trying to save people. You know, they actually wanted to just see how like, we don't know that. I'm telling you the thought that went into it. Yeah. It's not about like everything has to match up like linear. Oh, this is this. No, of course they changed their tactics, but the whole goal, like you said, of population control of all of this stuff, that's still there.
Well, like I said, the first OER on that report was Cold Spring Harbor.
the repression and censorship by these same companies. I mean, and it's people on the left that's celebrating this shit. It is the people who normally fight for First Amendment rights. It's people normally who fight for, people to have rights that's guaranteed, like, in the so-called Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which arguably has never really applied to Black people when you think about the amount of repression, and we literally still have political prisoners locked up from the 70s.
I know.
Almost 50 years. Mumia, he's from Philadelphia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like all of this stuff. Yeah. I appreciate you. Thank you for taking your time. We have never been able to get together on a podcast and do anything under an hour. And I appreciate it. Seriously.
There was somebody from Connecticut who messaged me. I'm like, and they said, well, I have a later meeting, but I'll try to check in. And then she's like, 100 slides. I'm like, I don't know. It's a lot, but I mean, people can refer to it. You can take it in stages, and wait a minute. I'm gonna click. No, I'm not gonna be able to click forward that much. Let me see. I just want to go back because I feel like, I want to close with that. Like, that's the image. That's the thing we have to understand. How do we get him out of that headset?
Yeah.
How do we all get out of the headset?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's where we go.
Well, I think that's for the people who have been listening and liking and sharing this video with their loved ones and friends and family and any and everybody who's willing to still critically think and listen. I encourage you all to share this video. And sadly, some people are not going to believe it until we're 10 years down the road. And which I think is a good thing, is that these videos will be here as documentation that, well, no, don't say nobody tried to warn you. You just didn't believe that person because they wasn't a talking figurehead on MSNBC. But don't say nobody tried to warn you.
This is going to be regular folks who fight this. I mean, that's when you look at what's happening in India and anybody if individuals who are the figureheads, it's too easy to get co-opted. It's going to be just regular people. That's why I really, for you, have this. I mean, I'm not saying you're just, but to have these platforms, this really matters because it's this consciousness that matters, is raising it at this level.
The problem is that companies like Google, Facebook, because YouTube is owned by Google. Companies like this, though, like, they're shadow banning videos and sometimes actually banning people. If you get too big, then pressure mounts from, and a lot of times they usually succumb to the pressure and they'll ban you. I know several people with pretty large followings, Black folks on Facebook, and their content is always shadow banned. That's the other thing we haven't really talked about, like all of the technology and how they can suppress your videos. Like they'll let you have the platform, but they'll participate in suppression. Like one way they do it is like you can type in a keyword and usually something will pop right up where they'll repress it and you got to go like all the way to page 10 on Google to see it instead of it being on the first page. No, this is real. They're bullshit. The AI, they program the AI to look for code words. Facebook is notorious for it. Google, I know several people.
Yeah, but how many people are talking about open education, resource, virtual reality? Like I mostly talk about stuff that isn't.
I had a friend tell me, and I tagged you in it on Twitter. I had a friend tell me, and she is a good friend, and I like her, but I had a friend tell me literally that I don't believe that AI and virtual reality is going to be running education. And she's very smart. Yeah. She's a JD.
Well, I would hope that it doesn't. But I mean, I think it's naive not to understand where very powerful people hope to take things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can hope, but I think to ignore it is not being in the interest of kids.
Exactly. It is not. It's not in the hell. It's not in the interest of kids or families.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, like they're doing the 2-generation thing where they're including the families in the bad.
That's big in Tulsa. That's big in Tulsa. George Kaiser's all about that. Aspen Institute and the Casey Foundation. And the Casey Foundation is based in United Parcel Service, UPS. So
yeah, that's UPS money. Yeah, that's UPS money. Yeah.
And that's it's foster care. It started out foster care management.
Wow.
You know,
well, I know we didn't really talk about this.
One places that SORA Open Society has a separate office in Baltimore.
They do.
And we did a whole, I see Vanessa's on.
Did you know that the Black president of Open Society Foundation stepped down because he's taking a position in the Biden administration?
Oh, of course. Oh my goodness. It's about to get really real.
And the kind of money that was thrown at Biden, like I never made the connection because I'm like, we're conditioned to believe that Republicans are the people who are most close to the big money hedge funds, let Wall Street run amok, low regulation, no regulation. We're socialized to believe that, what the fuck, Wall Street should be funding Trump. Why the hell are they funding Biden? Now you make it all make sense.
Yep.
Wall Street bankrolled, and specifically not just Wall Street, but Silicon Valley. They not only bankrolled Biden, they bankrolled the 2 Democratic senators who won in Georgia. Now, this is hard for a lot of Black people to hear. And I've been canceled already from some people in my community for pointing that out. But
well, Biden's Delaware is the center of blockchain and the incorporation, these new fourth sector benefit corporations. That's going to be all up in Delaware. And Delaware is piloting blockchain healthcare records. And like literally, who would have thought a year ago that your healthcare record would be potentially your parole, right? I mean, with this biosecurity state, your electronic healthcare record is essentially your mobility pass.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've introduced you to Ralph Smart. He has a YouTube channel with 1.8 million people. When you and I first talked, I said, you sound just like this person, this YouTuber that I listen to. And like some of the key words that you were using triggered me to think about him. And so I sent you one of his videos just so you could get a feel for him. But the thing that I'm thinking about now, like to get this information to more people, because like he talks about this stuff on the surface level. You get down into he talks about it like from a metaphysical, very spiritual place. Because he says the same thing that you do. Like we can win, but we have to do this. We have to do that, you know, manifesting and all of that kind of stuff. And some people think that's quirky, but one of the things that I'm thinking about now is a way for you and him to connect. He has a much greater reach, actually a worldwide reach. He actually lives in the United Kingdom, but went to the university here in the United States. As you probably heard his accent, he's definitely from the United Kingdom, but or Britain, whatever they call it today, London, somewhere over there. But I'm thinking about connecting you two to do a video for your information, like to connect with his spiritual stuff. Because I feel like he don't even know all the details either, because he talks about it very spiritually and he uses some of the language that you use, but he never like literally like makes the in-depth connections that you have, like the level of research and clippings of articles and all of this shit that you just presented in this 100 slides tonight would be extremely helpful for an audience of 1.8 million people worldwide. Yeah. He has 1.8 million people that subscribe.
I have to figure out how to do it shorter.
No, I think
I'm long form, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. People who want the information are going to stay. We've had a steady between 25 and 35 people steady fluctuating this entire almost 3 hours. The people who want this information, we have to let them want it and let them share it out.
Yeah.
But it's not about like trying to change the way people think, because I've given up, like how you said you gave up on the education justice movement. I've given up on trying to change people. I only want to connect with people who want to connect with this, because how I met you was because I was already there. Like, I'm like, okay, I need to like make some connections. Like I know, like in my spirit, I don't like what's happening. I don't want to be forced to take a vaccine. I don't want to be forced to do all this shit that you showing that they want to do with kids. I don't want that. But I wasn't able to necessarily like make the argument in a concise way because I did not have literally all that you just presented tonight. And that's what it is.
Well, and I to me, it helps me feel more in control of it. Like if I can map it out, it's kind of my processing. It's like, I see you, and literally if one of the things I can do is show up and contest this to people, like, because I'm in a big city, these people show up here. If I can come and say, show up in the Dirks at Senate building and say, I don't think it's right you put kids on surveillance play tables. Maybe that's all I can do, one person can do. But it does matter.
It does matter. And whether we feel like we're making but I am going to reach out to Ralph. He like, when you have 1.8 million followers, it's hard to respond to every single comment. But one of the ways in which that I know that he looks at is Instagram, his Instagram stories. I'm going to try to connect with him to see if because he usually does it by himself, but there's been occasions where he's done a video like in collaboration with someone else.
Yeah.
And I would love for you all to collaborate to get this information to more people. Because this is global. Like you said, you've been talking to people in Japan.
Yeah.
This is not just the United States. This is a global.
Well, and that's why it's an imperial project. I mean, I said this in my talk with Sarah, it's cellular colonization.
We're going to be colonized down to our cellular level.
Yeah.
Before we get off, can you share a little, maybe you'll have to come back at some other time to like really get into the bio stuff, because a lot of people are pushing back on people who say, well, don't get the shot. There's nanotechnology in there. I don't know whether that part is true. And I don't know whether they, like the people who are getting the shot now, like there's some nanotech or some shit in it. I don't know. But I do see a lot of people pushing back on that part of it. Online, and I don't know whether you spent any time like really researching it. There was one person that did give a very powerful presentation. His as you said, some of the people are strange allies, but it's from the Nation of Islam. Dr. Wesley Muhammad, who was a PhD, he gave an entire presentation on why people shouldn't get the vaccine. I don't remember him talking specifically about nanotechnology actually being in this particular vaccine, but he did go back, and it made me think about you, because damn it, John Hopkins is in the middle of all this shit. He was talking about John Hopkins the entire time, and I listen to Alison. He sounds like Alison.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I know this stuff is connecting, because he talked about the research from it. I believe he even mentioned Event 201. I never heard of that shit till I talked to you.
Yeah, now April Haynes is that, I went down to Baltimore with Jason and Vanessa and Rachel, and we spent a day just surfacing this stuff in Baltimore. I did, and analytics, the image with the daisy with the kid, those are ex-Johns Hopkins people, and that's in Baltimore. It's in the Inner Harbor. And, it's all, but we went to the applied physics lab. First off, which is about 30 or 40 minutes out beyond Baltimore first, because April Haynes was at Event 201 and she was total deep state. And I'm like, oh, Jason, we got to go there. And we just went to the visitor parking lot. But
Isn't she in the Biden administration now? Isn't April Haynes in the Biden administration now?
Yeah, then she's the head of intelligence.
Damn.
I know, right?
Damn.
I know. It's in for a penny, in for a pound. Like I said, we're putting it down, we're laying it out. Like, I'm glad I wrote what I wrote about community schools in 2015, because guess what? Now it's catching up. Let's see what the next year brings.
That was 6 years ago, Allison. Wow.
I know. I mean, and people hated me for saying it. And I said, listen, I'm not saying in general it's a bad concept, but it's not what people think. Who holds the power right now? And that's the thing with the left and the progressives. Who actually holds the power? Do the people hold the power right now?
No, the managers, the left has done the left has been really shrewd. One thing about the right is that they have not figured out how to weaponize identity, except for they haven't figured out like how to, put some black and brown faces on it and really do it up. I think they're doing that now, like on a smaller scale, but the shit that I've been through over the last several years of me being on the national stage now with the NGO space, especially when I was with the organization that I was with before this new one, everything is just all about checking off boxes. It's all about control. Like, are you poor? Are you black? Are you LGBT? Okay, you can come in.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing. Like in Philly, I don't really fit in anywhere because, I mean, according to the rules, I should just shut up and not do it, and for whatever reason, I'm a conduit and I don't come up with I spend a lot of time researching, but a lot of this is information that is generously shared by other people and experiences that I have had that I feel called to. And I'm certainly not going to lecture at Black and brown communities about what they should do about it or that they should listen to me. But if what my role is to tell other white folks not to put children on blockchain, then that's what I'm going to do. But I'm not going to just wait for someone to tell me what I'm allowed to do. I mean, I want to act in a good spirit, but it's going to come from my conscience. So,
yeah.
Well,
this has been great. We're almost at 3 hours. I know you're tired. I'm tired. I got an early morning.
You had a double podcast today.
Yeah, no, I am really tired. But you're amazing. Thank you. What you're doing, my grandmother would say, is the Lord's work. And I know you're not necessarily a believer in that way. But my grandmother would say, this is the Lord's work.
I'll send some good vibes, Dr. Cardona's way that he can get out from under this, or that he can steer through the rocks and do the right thing.
Maybe somebody, if you're listening, send this video to Dr. Cardona. Say, look, we're talking about you.
Well, we're talking about Connecticut. We're wishing you the best.
Connecticut, yeah.
Let's see how we get out of this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison. Like I said, this has been great. We really appreciate you. And you and I have to do it again. You get some rest though, and I thank you so much for doing this work. I know you spend a lot of time. It's a ton of research. So thank you.
Got a little confidence.
Yeah.
That's why we do it, right?
That's exactly right. Right. Well, you take care. I'll see you soon.
You too.
Thanks everyone for watching. Please like and share the video. We need to get this out to as many people as possible. Say goodbye. Say goodnight.
That was a gift.